if you're gonna
Where'd
act
you
like
get
that,
it?
bro, eBay from China, so it's kind of ironic. But
I'm distracted here from a slight dust particle. They're like, that's it, call off the Jag. I'm very scared.
Hey gang, thanks for watching a really bootlegged version of a very popular YouTube series from a YouTuber that I frequently make fun of but feel no qualms at all about stealing his ideas. I'm here debating why nuclear power sucks. Change my mind. And like all change my minds, you can't actually change my mind. But just listen for the next 2 hours as I argue with people. Let's go. Here we're here to talk about why nuclear power is good from your point of view. And obviously, in case you can't read, I'm saying that nuclear power sucks.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Change my mind.
Sure. All right. So I think we're in a situation right now where everyone's arguing about what source of energy we actually want to use. And the problem is it's become a bit like a religion because people are becoming emotionally attached to different kinds of energy. So you got people who are obsessed with wind and solar, and then you got people, the so-called boomers who are in love with coal, for example, right? And that,
So cool.
And we've got like a massive clash here. One side is like, we have to fight climate change, we have to lower our emissions, and we have to transition to something else. Even if that makes things a bit more expensive temporarily, that's fine. You got another side that's coming out and saying, no, but coal and fossil fuel provide baseload power. They provide reliable electricity that's cheap, it powers our economy. With nuclear, you actually have a chance to have both of these things together and actually break that ideological divide. So we can actually have a sensible conversation.
Why do you think that?
Well, because at the moment, there are tons of energy companies with massive portfolios in wind, solar, and coal, and natural gas. And they're sort of winning in two ways. On one hand, they get the subsidy for the renewables from the government. On the other hand, they have firming contracts so they can have reliable power supply. And those contracts add about $30, $40 to the price of the energy supply. And they're making money by selling coal-fired energy and natural gas-fired energy at the same time. So they're cheering, they're loving it. This works out for them perfectly. Nuclear is actually in many ways a threat to them because they don't have those portfolios yet. And you can have a single source that takes care of both those things. You don't need to firm it up. And also, if you're going to firm up renewables with backup, why would you want the status quo of using coal and natural gas when you have nuclear, which is about significantly cleaner than those two sources? The same carbon footprint, a quarter of the carbon footprint I've heard of a solar farm, and about the same as a wind farm. So,
Well, I have not heard those statistics, in fact.
well, I'm happy to provide you with sources.
Well, go ahead, because the ones that I've heard is from Stanford University, and they've been studying it extensively, I think since 2014. Since 2014, they have been doing an updated version of how do we get to 100% renewable energy, I think by the time frame of 2050. Since 2014, they've said that it's possible with the technology that exists today, and every year, this is by 25 professors, peer-reviewed, every year since, it has become easier and easier as more technology comes online. Now, from those statistics, and this is coming from Lazard, which is just an investment firm, right? So they've got no dog in the fight.
Oh, you'd be
when it comes to
surprised.
this.
You'd be very surprised.
Well, I suppose everybody's got a dog in the fight, but in terms of if you're getting, if you're getting, it's the same thing as like during the election, how they were just saying that like Bill Shorten's climate policy is going to cost $500 billion. And then you look at the source and then it's from the energy industry. If you're talking about investment firms, basically what they're looking for is where to put their money.
Yep.
What is the best investment to put in?
I'm
and
glad
this is the same with Citibank as well.
Sure.
And so both of them said, now Lazard said that nuclear energy is going to cost $150 per megawatt to produce, per megawatt hour to produce. Renewable energy will cost $30 to $60 per megawatt hour. This is according to Lazard's findings. Furthermore, on top of the fact that it's going to cost $30 to $60, the price is going down and has been significantly reducing over the last 8 years. This is from their findings. So, in the time from 2010 to 2018, the price of wind has gone down by 66%, or 2/3. Solar has gone down 80%. I don't even know how much it's gone down this year. This is just from 2010 to 2018. In that same time period, the price of nuclear energy has increased. And Lazard is being conservative with their estimates here because they're saying that the average time for a nuclear power plant to be made takes 6 years. The reality is it's closer to 10 years. It's about 8 point something years to 9 point something years. So actually, the amount of carbon that it emits into the air in the background while you're waiting for this to come online, while wind and solar takes about 1 to 3 years to come online. Nuclear energy takes about 10 years. And that's not including the planning time either. And when you're talking about a country like Australia that doesn't have an industry to build off of, where do you go from there?
Okay, I mean, there's many points to unpack there, and I hope that I don't forget some of the things you raised, because I
Sorry,
do have answers to all of
just
them.
interrupt me. I do that. I just kind of just trail off on things. So
Yeah,
do that in
that's
the
all right.
future.
Might as well get it all out at once. Yeah. Okay, so look, they've been making claims like this for a very long time, and the truth is, if those claims came to fruition in real life, I'd be the happiest guy in the world. The issue, though, is...
Why aren't you happy then?
Because it's not coming true, but look, I'll get to that in a second. So, here's the thing. So, I've not read that particular study, but I've read very similar claims, especially about the prices. I've read a report from the CSIRO and AEMO making basically the same claim. So these claims are out there, but you actually dig down into what they really say. And they almost always don't take into account the costs of the reliability component of firming capacity, which adds significantly to the price. One of these reports, for example, claimed that the entry of wind and solar would lower prices by about 2% across the whole country on a conservative estimate. Sounds great, right? But then you read it down the report and it says, oh, by the way, this will require more investment in firming capacity, which is going to increase wholesale prices, the biggest component of the cost stack for consumers in the long term. So they're admitting it. And if you look at what we've actually seen happen in real life rather than predictions into the future, in Australia, every single time a coal-fired power station has been pushed into retirement, you've seen prices go volatile immediately. You've seen them shoot up and so on. Because while wind and solar are extremely, are cheap and cost-effective while they are online, the issue is with the firming. The issue is when you don't have enough supply happening in the moment, and that often isn't accounted for in a lot of these models that are used by these studies. Now, you mentioned that they don't have a dog, the investment firm doesn't have a dog in the fight. Well, a lot of these wealthy investment funds have tons of investment in energy companies that are banking on wind and solar, in part because it allows them
and
to
other investment firms have investments
Yeah.
in nuclear technology as well.
Yes, but it's not as prevalent.
Why is that not so
Because
prevalent?
nuclear is a big political risk. It's one of those things where...
I don't know about that. I mean,
right,
look,
it is, right? Let's admit it.
why is it a political risk?
It's a political risk because of public perception. People still remember Fukushima, they remember Chernobyl, and so on. Fukushima was the perfect storm of everything that could have possibly gone wrong. And despite all of that, a lot of the claims about it are complete exaggerations.
What are those claims that are exaggerations?
Sure, so there are claims that the radiation has destroyed the area and it's caused all sorts of health impacts. Now, there have been health impacts.
And what are those?
There have been claims of radiation sickness and so on. A lot of people have vacated the area. But what's actually happened on the ground is peer-reviewed studies, 2015, 2016, a majority of the health impacts are psychosocial. They're people thinking, panicking and having anxiety and things like that, as opposed to actual physical impacts of the radiation.
Okay, so
they had...
wait, one question there. So you're talking about radiophobia?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you could phrase it that way, I guess, yeah.
Well, that is how they phrase it.
Sure.
And that is also how the UN phrases it as well. Do you know where the term radiophobia came from?
No, I'm hearing it now.
Well,
Yeah.
it's the same thing as like when it came up with when cigarettes and people were saying that, well, there's bad health impacts associated with cigarettes, for instance.
Yeah.
And there are.
No,
But the thing is, when at the time they were saying that you've got fumophobia, which means that you're scared of cigarettes and it's an unfounded fear and you're just imagining these things. And so essentially the same thing has happened. And this is a classic playbook that is made up by, he's known as the grandfather of propaganda, Edward Bernays, who was originally hired by the nuclear industry to come up with ways to sell to the public that that nuclear power is safe. So originally he was the one that came up with it. So he popularized the idea of radiophobia. But this is an extraordinary claim to say that when they're saying that most of this is just a psychological impact in the minds of people, and actually the only reason that they're sick is because they're imagining
Oh no,
that
that's
they
not
have these
what I
problems.
said. I said that there have been people who actually did get sick when it happened.
But you're saying that most of the impacts are psychological.
Yes.
That's your claim.
In terms of magnitude, I'm not contesting the fact that radiation does have serious problems with it. I'm contesting the magnitude of the actual risk of that particular incident. And that incident was,
But
along
how
a
many people do
tectonic
you
fault
think-
line. It was a tsunami.
Yes,
It
yes.
were all sorts of factors that wouldn't apply to Australia, where if we end up building reactors.
No, but we would
in
have
safe
different
areas.
problems that face it, such as overheating the reactor, which also just like destroys the safety components within
There
it
are
every time you have to
ways,
shut
ways
it down.
around that, which a nuclear scientist will probably elaborate on better than I can, because my background is in nuclear physics. But I want to take things back to some of the stuff that you said earlier.
Wait, what?
So,
But I still want to unpack Fukushima. You can't just say that nothing happened.
no,
there.
I'm not. Oh no,
But,
I'm happy
you're
to
saying that there are
continue.
some
I'm
people
happy to continue. I'm just trying to address many of your points, like, at once. Okay,
well,
let me finish in Fukushima, and then I'll, backpedal. I mean, not backpedal. I'll move on to the cost issue. So with Fukushima, they did a study, peer-reviewed, 2015.
And whose was this?
I forgot the name of the journal, but I'll link that. I'll provide that, and you can put that down or whatever. That's fine. I'm happy to supply that.
I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah.
WHO, but continue.
Yep. So they gave a French high school students Geiger counters or decimeters that measure radiation, and they visited the area on a field trip, and it measured their radiation exposure, and they found that when the kids walked through the airport security scanner, radiation spiked up like crazy. When they were at the French embassy, radiation spiked up like crazy. When they were in the actual zone of Fukushima, there's a very little uptick. It's barely significant. So I think we
Is
need,
this the one that
yeah.
was reported on by BBC? Because BBC had to retract that. Because
I
they were
don't
saying
think
that
so.
there was an uptick when they were saying that it was basically, when they were there, it went from, the exposure was barely higher than background radiation, which I think is just a minimum of like 1 millisievert.
Yep.
She did the calculation live on air. She was one of the people that reported on this, and immediately it was just completely. The BBC had to redact it because there were so many experts coming in and saying that she did the calculation wrong, and that they're moving people back into areas, precincts of Fukushima, that have basically they're moving the amount of radiation exposure that was beforehand deemed safe for the public to consume, because it's about like 1 millisievert. Now they're moving it up to 20 millisieverts. 20 millisieverts is how much the average radiation worker working in a nuclear power plant is exposed to. And they're usually wearing lead, and they go away from the nuclear power plant. They're not constantly there ingesting food from the region. They're not constantly there absorbing all of it in the air and playing around in the ground on it. And furthermore, there's a lot of research into this about the fact that as soon as a kid is exposed to more than 1 millisievert of radiation, cancer starts increasing, because children are far more susceptible to cancer than the average adult is. I think the average boy is 10 times more, there's a 10 times likelihood of a chance that they're going to get some kind of thyroid cancer or leukemia, let alone all the other adverse health effects that are resulting in radiation poisoning, right? And then girls have 20 times the exposure, 20 times the risk. They're moving people back into these precincts where they're now it's just, according to the government's own figures, 20 millisieverts. Furthermore than that, the reports from the WHO were saying that the amount of radiation that people were exposed to is about 50 to 80% less than the average. And furthermore, even the government's own physicists that were there trying to measure the radiation came out in 2017, I think it was, and said that actually we got it wrong. We were saying that these people were exposed to about a third the level of radiation that they were actually exposed to. They were actually exposed to 3 times as much radiation, the people that they moved out very quickly. There's 135,000 people that are homeless in Fukushima now. They're just living in boxes. It's really sad looking at all the footage actually, because you just see all these kids drawing windows on their box to make it. Anyway, it always makes me sad thinking about that, just these kids being like, yay, I'm going to school. Anyway, anyway, the whole thing about Fukushima is there's been a lot of reports coming from. There was a lot of reports coming from press there. There was a Japanese paper whose name escapes me because it's a Japanese paper and I don't know Japanese, but it had a circulation of about 6.6 million people, and it won the equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize in Japan 2 years in a row for reporting on the cover-ups that the government was implementing as a result of this. So things like gag orders on doctors, the fact that they were saying to doctors, you will lose your funding if you even mention radiation poisoning to your clients, right? After those 2 years, what happened is that the government moved in and completely shut down their investigative reporting team. As a result of that, Japan moved from the 11th freest press on Earth to the 77th freest press on Earth. And this is just them pointing out the inconsistencies in the government's own reporting. And the government is not reporting on the other adverse health effects of Fukushima. Essentially, they're doing the same thing that the WHO always does, which is just go, oh yeah, we'll just measure thyroid cancer and we'll just measure some leukemias and that'll be about it. But there's not millions, but there's a lot of other things that you need to be measuring when it comes to radiation poisoning. It's a very, very serious situation, Fukushima. And on top of that, it's not over. I think it's about 50,000 dump trucks of radiation has been pouring into the Pacific Ocean since it, because it did things that, and this is the whole thing, when you come to like engineers and physicists, they always say this stuff of like, this can't happen. Now, when it happened with Fukushima, they were talking about you probably know what this is actually, I'm too stupid to remember what the type of explosion it is, but essentially it's an explosion that happens at the speed of sound. Now, according to the nuclear regulatory industry, that was not possible, but it happened 3 times. Furthermore, it was not possible that Fukushima was supposed to, the actual core was supposed to melt down and hit groundwater level. It's currently at groundwater level. So it's contaminating the Pacific Ocean to the point that there's even isotopes found in fish on the east coast of America now. So it's contaminated the entire Pacific Ocean. And you can say that, well, that's a worst case scenario, and it is a worst case scenario, but that is the danger of nuclear power.
Sure, look, like any other technology, there are these dangers, and with nuclear power, yes, the worst case scenarios are incredibly
terrible,
bad,
right?
Yeah, of course.
So you agree with that?
Thank
God. Sorry.
Certainly.
Like, absolutely. Dude, I'll give you praise for that.
Look, but at the end of the day, one, we have to look at what the risks actually are and how they can be mitigated and managed. And 2, we have to look at exactly what went wrong and how that can be solved. And 3, look, the study I mentioned, it's a peer-reviewed study. I'm not sure about the other stuff that you mentioned. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But even if we take that stuff at face value, we have a situation where it was an old built plant. It was something that was going to be decommissioned not that long after anyway. And it was an old school design. And since then, innovations have come a massively long way.
But again, they said that the things that happened in Fukushima couldn't have happened and were impossible. And furthermore, as a physicist, and I really respect, you're studying physics, right? Is that the deal? No, what do you do?
I did law and media.
Oh, okay.
But I have an interest in these
I don't know,
topics,
just assumed that you had glasses. I was like, damn, this guy's smart. But
that's why I
law and
wear
media
them.
is, it's up there. It's definitely up there. I've got a huge interest in it as well now. It's a fascinating topic. But I completely agree with that point. But like the technology and innovation has improved. But the other thing that happened, the reason that the Fukushima Daiichi problem occurred in the first place is that the wall that was built around it was supposed to be 5 meters tall. It was supposed to be 15 meters tall. That was the tsunami wall that they were supposed to build over it. And engineers were begging the people building it, ever since it was built in the 60s, make it 15 meters high. There's instances, because it's Japan, we've got records going back 1,000 years, of there being waves that were 20 meters high. So they were saying 15 should be the absolute minimum.
You have my agreement with you here, by the way. Absolutely, that was a stupid thing of them to do, to not build the wall that up. And for the government to, end up trying to repress being criticized or called out and claims they made, I completely agree. I mean, this applies not just to nuclear, but to anything else. I mean, this is not a new thing, governments trying to suppress things which go against the narrative. But that doesn't necessarily...
And furthermore, allowing companies to get away with those cost-cutting measures.
Sure.
Which is what happened in
Fukushima.
Look,
the issue isn't more regulation or less regulation, it's having the right amount of regulation.
But why do you trust that a government will always implement the right amount of regulation? I certainly don't.
I don't think they always will, but if you have the scientists and you have the stakeholder groups there to sort of present their evidence...
But that's what happened in Fukushima. They did have those.
Yeah, but...
And the engineers were agreeing with it as well, and they're usually the most hardcore... They get hard-ons for this shit, dude. And they were the ones that, they're really pro it.
We're talking about a specific country at a specific time. I don't think that's a reason to give up completely, not try anything. Look, everyone goes, look, I wouldn't want a nuclear reactor in my backyard. Well, we have one in Sydney already at Lucas Heights, and there's some great scientists there doing amazing work and research in this field.
Well, it's not exactly the same as a Gen 3 reactor,
It's not. I'm not saying it is. But what I'm saying is we have the expertise there, and we now, being as far along as we are, while we've been left behind by the rest of the world, have the benefit of looking at and seeing what to do and what not to do. With what you mentioned earlier about the cost of nuclear and the price going up, now a lot of that is capital costs, because it costs a lot to build these reactors.
Exactly.
But one of the biggest writing factors in the cost of the reactor are the regulations that are in place. And again, it's not about more or less, it's about the right amount. So in the USA, for example, it's about $10 to $15 billion to build a reactor. It's not viable at those prices. It's almost not
Well,
viable.
that's the estimate. Actually, in reality, it goes way over that most of the time. So, for instance, and the ones they're building in Alabama, I think it is at the moment, they're at $30 billion.
Yeah, so it can be that heavy. It can be that insanely high. In the UK, they because nuclear is competing with subsidized wind and solar, they've had to subsidize nuclear as well to make that competitive. But an example of what to do is probably a place like South Korea, where costs have not gone up but trended down, and they're able to standardize designs and rapidly move them out. They're exporting it all over the world, and they've not had these problems at all. They've had regulations.
They've had very different problems.
Well, nothing near what we mentioned earlier. We have a chance to learn from those experiences, and
You want to learn from the South Korean experience?
absolutely.
Well, pull up a chair. Oh, you already have. All right. The thing is, when it comes to South Korea, there's two presidents that are in jail at the moment because of massive corruption charges. They were both from the same party. I can't remember the name of the party. One of them was the daughter of the previous dictator. She was an absolute moron. She did about like 2 public appearances her entire tenureship. Anyway, they're extremely corrupt people. And essentially what happened, the reason why Korea is so much cheaper and so much faster at implementing these things is because they counterfeit the parts. And there is instances of whistleblowers going to it. And this is all laid out as a result of the trials that happened to these two presidents because it went all the way to the top. There was instances of whistleblowers saying that we have all of these bootlegged parts that they're putting in there. Some of these transistors, like one guy claims that he saw the transistors catch fire 300 times and was saying to his, the people above him, can we please do something about this? But because it's Korean society, they were just like, respect your elders. And they're like, oh, sorry, and they just moved away again.
That's a Japanese accent. But go on.
Yeah, and I lived in Korea for a while as well. I still can't do it. But like, they, so anyway, as a result of this, the reason that the Koreans are able to do it so much cheaper and so much faster is essentially because they've pulled back on safety regulations. All these extremely corrupt precedents that are happening. One of the major things is the Trump administration, for instance, has approved a new type of Gen 3 reactor that Korea is building at the moment. This reactor doesn't have the safety protocols and safety features in it that would have prevented Chernobyl and Fukushima. And they have approved that in the US. This is the South Korean experience.
Look, I'm sorry, but I have to disagree that, I've heard of those scandals, I've seen those claims made, but I have to disagree with the blanket statement that because of this one little thing that I've isolated, that's the reason why they're able to do it cheaper. There's a lot more to it than that. The fact is that they haven't had these sorts of incidents, and the fact is when that scandal,
haven't had those sort of instances?
Well, they haven't. It hasn't actually happened. They haven't had any meltdowns. They haven't had any of that sort of thing. And now the thing is, like,
but you know what has happened? They came back with a geological survey that was supposed to stop until 2041. It didn't need to go until 2041. It was a deep geological survey of the area because they were seeing if they were on a fault line or not in Korea.
Right.
Essentially what happened was that there was an earthquake around Ulsan, which is where the majority of reactors are. And then they realized, oh shit, we've got to shut these fucking reactors down because if this happens here, if a Fukushima happens in Korea, it'll be way worse than when it happens in Japan.
Well, it's a good thing those geological issues don't apply to us. We're relatively stable compared to, especially that part of the world. That's an especially bad part of the world.
But if it happens, and there was a lot of lucky factors that happened with Fukushima. So for instance, 80% of the time the wind was blowing out to the ocean. This is a direct quote from the Prime Minister at the time who was rolled by the energy industries because he said, we want to shut down all of the power plants. And they said, no, we want to make money, you're gone. And so they replaced him with another Prime Minister.
They want people to have affordable electricity. I mean, Japan's prices skyrocketed after Fukushima. They're not relying on natural gas. Their emissions have gone like this. The cost of electricity has gone like this. Wind and solar did not step in and make up the difference. They're buying Australian natural gas.
Well, of course it would have, because they're like 57. Well, if 57 power plants go offline at once, prices are going to increase, right?
Yeah,
but what has made it cheaper is renewables. And the thing is, the reason for that is because Japan, like here, how the mining industry basically controls Australia, power companies control Japan. And so essentially they get to decide how much things cost. That's why a lot of companies by themselves are opting into renewables, because then they can control their energy instead of having these companies that are able to essentially control the parliament there and say, like when the actual government was saying, we don't want to have nuclear energy, and then they said, well, we're just going to roll you until we get a prime minister that does. But anyway, he was saying that as a result of Fukushima, if the wind was blowing in the other direction, So it was blowing onto land instead. There would just be this huge no-go zone in between Japan. And his direct quote was that Japan would have ceased to exist as a sovereign nation. This is the type of technology that we're talking about here. They would have had to evacuate 35 million people. It wasn't that far away from Tokyo. And on top of that, it also relied on the fact that there was 50 people there that stayed behind because there was just a manager that basically explained the situation to them and said, look, we're going to get leukemia, we're going to die, but if we don't do this, Japan will be destroyed. So they had to go and sit there and shut down the rest of the reactors before they all started melting down as well. And so basically, the only reason that Japan is here today is because of luck and courage. That's not a great energy policy, is it?
No,
just relying on luck and courage.
That's a very slanted way of looking at things. No doubt that there are people trying to influence the government to push their outcome. That happens in any industry. In Australia, the power companies are massively invested in wind and solar, for example, and they have those firming contracts that also let them to sell in their coal and natural gas too, and they're making a killing from it. So, I mean, these factors apply not just nuclear, but across many different sources of power. And look, let's keep this in perspective. So, peer-reviewed research, Australian National University. They've estimated, on a conservative estimate, that 1.84 million deaths related to air pollution have been avoided because nuclear power began replacing coal-fired power between 1979 and 2009 alone. And they estimate that a lot more could have been avoided if it weren't for hurdles that had come in the way. And now, obviously, there need to be, more regulation on safety and so on as the technology evolves and develops. But then that needs to be proportionate. And as we all know, that often isn't the case. It can either be too little or too much. Now, the thing is...
Well, also, when it comes to that, Stanford University stated that because nuclear power takes so long to come online, so we're talking about 10 to 15 years.
This is a long-term thing. But
a long-term thing. But that's what I'm saying, is that if you're going to say that it has prevented 1.8 million deaths as a result of the fact that it doesn't emit as much carbon dioxide as coal does, and that's true, it definitely does. But the thing is, wind and solar comes online a lot faster, it's a lot cheaper to produce, and it's so cheap that there's actual companies that are doing this now as opposed to just waiting for governments to subsidise it.
But it's keeping fossil fuels in business. That's how they firm it up. You can't do it otherwise.
But wait. If you're going to talk about that, this is the prediction from Stanford University that you're talking about.
That hasn't come true yet. It's been 5 years since that study came out. Not happening.
What's not happening?
Wind and solar aren't rapidly replacing coal. It's just not happening.
What do you mean it's just not happening? Do you know what the numbers were in 2017 as a result of the new energy that's coming online? It was 64% that was renewable.
Oh, it's going up. A lot of it is subsidy. A lot of it is artificially propped up by the government.
How is it artificially propped up when there's areas in China, for instance, where it's cheaper to put in solar panels in certain provinces?
You realize that Chinese subsidize almost everything, right? I mean, the state controls.
But what I'm saying
everything.
is it's cheaper, even without subsidies, to put in solar panels in China
You
than it
realize
is to put
that
in coal.
China are also
with
rapidly
subsidies.
expanding both coal and rapidly expanding nuclear as well. By the year 2050, they expect that 30% of the energy will be nuclear, and the same amount will be from. Oh, they do. I have seen it.
I know they expect it.
I've
I
seen
don't
it,
expect it, but the thing is, at the moment, they're at 50 megawatts, and so actually that they was talking about 200 or 300 megawatts of energy, which is just not happening. In fact, I've got from the World Nuclear Industry Status Report that came out in 2018. They were saying that China's nuclear industry, because it's China, they use poetic terms like just being like in a death spiral or something like that, because it's just renewables are just kicking their asses.
Oh, come on, man. Really?
What do you mean?
Renewables firmed up with coal, which is, by the way, sold at a loss to the power companies in China because the government owns all the mines. And that's one of the reasons why they're able to prop it up, quite simply, because they're lowering the cost on one end. Prop up the renewables, because you have to firm up them with fossil fuels, which the government owns, and which the government sells to itself and to its own companies and its own manufacturing centers at low price. I mean, this is entirely top-down managed.
Nuclear power isn't subsidized.
They're probably subsidizing nuclear power as well, but the difference is that when you...
Probably.
No, look, the difference is...
It's the most expensive energy there is. They're definitely subsidizing it.
Yeah, but no, actually, most expensive. That's not true.
Well, why did
Japan's prices skyrocket when it moved here? Why did Germany get absolutely killed?
I just explained the reason. It's because they had to shut down 54
look at Germany.
Germany,
their prices are some of the highest in the entire world. And it's all happened once they started decommissioning plants and then shoving in more of the so-called Engelwald, putting in wind and solar, driving up the price like absolutely crazy. And the emissions are going up like crazy as well. This is the real world experience that seems to contradict some claims made in an academic paper funded by your admission and investment company. I mean, let's look at real-world experience here.
Well, if we're looking at the real-world experience, the paper that you're talking about was funded by Michael Schellenberg, right? Advise you to look up who Michael Schellenberger is and not just look at his TED Talk. Look at the people that are countering him and countering his claims. One of those examples
The ANU
is...
study was not funded by Michael Schellenberg. It was public research. It was from Australian National University.
So this is the one that's talking about Germany? Because let me
No, it's
tell
the
you about the Germany
1.84
experience.
million figure.
Well,
Yeah.
well, that's not this. We're talking about the Germany and France.
Oh
one
no,
at the
you don't.
moment.
There's no one paper on Germany. There's tons of research on it. It's well established. It's borne out by statistics. Like the moment you shove in more renewables, the prices go up because you have to invest in the network assets and things to make that viable, and you need to invest in firming capacity. This is empirically proven. You don't even need a paper to make a prediction. It's actually happened.
Well,
We're seeing it in front of our
the whole
eyes.
thing is the wholesale price of power has decreased in Germany. The reason that power prices are increasing is the same reason that they increase in Australia. It's because private companies control how much these cost. Well, you can make that face, but that's the reality of the situation.
That's not the reality. That's
What do you mean that's not the
claim.
reality of it? Why is that an absurd claim? That is exactly the reality of the situation. It's just that in Germany, there is a lot more private control of the energy sector, and that's why the price
Do you know that
increases.
when the Victorian grid in the state of Victoria was privatized in the 1990s, prices went down rapidly? In Queensland, where the government controls all the electricity, they've seen the same trajectory of prices going up as has happened in the rest of the country. So this idea that
talk about New South
privatization
Wales.
equals...
What about New South Wales?
In New South Wales, the biggest difference hasn't actually been the so-called leasing of the poles and wires. It has been the wholesale costs going up due to overinvestment in network assets. A lot of them...
And why is that?
A lot of them in order to bring more wind and solar online, because you have to connect that to the grid. It has to be out in the middle of nowhere where your wind farms and your solar
Yeah, but
farms
why
are.
is there overinvestment in these?
Because the
in
government
this?
is propping, has this agenda of forcing in renewables. Yes.
Where are you getting that
The
from?
ACCC. The ACCC.
Because look, the
is
reason
the
that these are
ACCC wrong?
overinvested in these,
Yeah.
when they're overinvesting in infrastructure, the reason for that is because they are able to go to the government and say that we need this investment here, and then they're able to pass that cost on to the consumer.
Yep, and it's
got
not
nothing
easier
to
when
do
it's
with
not easier when
renewables.
you're shoving in renewables.
Well, well, if you're talking about the price of power going down, it's gone down in South Australia as a result of them investing in renewables.
They have
These
the world's highest power bills. World's highest.
Yeah, and they've been going
and
down
they've had
since
blackouts.
they've been going down since the renewables have been introduced into
They
the
had the
private.
most renewable penetration when they had the world's highest prices 2 years ago, and they still have some of the world's highest prices. So really, that isn't borne out in reality.
If you look at it, the prices decreased ever since they've been introducing these. And again, it's because private companies control it, and it's the reason they have the highest, again, is because they have some of the highest control of just a few private companies owning most of the energy grid. And when they had blackouts, do you know why they had those blackouts?
There were three factors involved. There was a weather event. There was a fossil fuel generator which did not come online immediately.
Exactly.
No, see, dude, I don't have a dog in this fight. And finally, well, none of this would have been a problem if you didn't have the intermittency of wind and solar, which meant that.
Come on,
Look, it is not easy to turn on and turn off a massive generator the way you have
but
to
you know
when
what
you're
is
dealing
easy
with
to turn
multiple
it off?
sources in the grid.
A battery. And that's why now the Australian energy operator says that South Australia has the most stable grid in the country because of these batteries, because they're so easy to turn on. They're like, I think 100 times quicker at turning on than a gas turbine is.
Yeah, but the best battery capacity that we have is nowhere near enough to firm up wind and solar. It's decades and decades behind where it needs to be. What are you going to do in the meantime?
Well, that's not
You're
what
relying on fossil
Transgrid.
fuel.
First of all, that's not what Transgrid says. That's not what UNSW says. That just released a study about it. Neither did University of Sydney. And on top of that, we've also got hydro pumps. But the other study came from CSIRO, and ANU published one as well. But all of them have said that it is very possible that we could have 100% renewable power by 2030 if there was the government incentive to do it.
Well, but that government incentive comes from paying private companies to firm up their network using fossil fuel. That's
Yeah, but what do you think is going to happen
all
when they
these
build
studies
a
have this
nuclear
much in
power
common.
plant?
All of these have this much in common. The fact they all make feel-good claims that run well into the future. They've been making these claims for a very long time, right? And it isn't really happening. Now,
What claims?
These claims that wind and solar will and combined with batteries will just replace everything, and it's going to happen, and power's going down. It's not in people's actual experience.
Well, do you know how much of the power grid is currently run by renewables? Nationally?
Well, it would be something like 20% or 30%.
Yeah, 20%.
Yeah.
Well, it's 19%.
Well, a lot of it would be but then you have to back. That's because you have to back it up with fossil fuel. It's not.
But in the next 2 years, it's jumping to 35%.
Well, yeah.
This is according to the National Energy Operator.
Yeah, but but the government is basically helping to force that in. They have subsidies.
Government, no, certainly.
They
It's not
certainly are.
helping.
They're subsidizing
They are
heavily.
helping in South Australia. Absolutely, they are. But nationally, they are not helping renewables.
They're subsidizing it.
I have an example of there was an
rooftop
economist that I
solar
was just
scheme,
talking
all of that.
about.
It's
Oh,
there.
Yeah, great.
It's blatant.
But we're not talking about these massive farms that they have to build, right? The investment is simply not there. And a classic example of that is that I think it was even just last year, it could have been the year before that, but I was talking to an economist who was working on a project where there was $15 billion of private investment in building solar farms in Australia. They went to the Liberal government and asked them about it. The Liberal government told them to fuck off. The Liberal government is currently thinking about building more coal plants. They're still having that debate. They would be some of the last coal plants built on Earth if they're doing that. They are not helping out renewables. There is no one that, like, I'm pretty sure even the Liberal government will, like, privately admit they are not helping the renewable sector. No one in the private sector says that the government is helping them. And on top of that, people like Transgrid and Ausgrid are saying that renewables have become so cheap now that within the next, that they're now just investing in it by themselves. They're not even waiting for investment from the government. This is the energy grid that is being built now. That's what I'm saying. It's happening without government subsidy. This is the first energy grid.
There's subsidies
in
happening
history.
as we speak.
There's definitely subsidies that are happening, but there's subsidies that happen to every energy sector. I mean, every energy source that there is.
There's no comparison whatsoever.
Do you know what's happening in America with the Trump administration?
Per megawatt hour subsidies on coal are about 40 cents. The equivalent figure for wind and solar is between $270 and $72 per megawatt hour. That was as of 2017. Yeah.
But where?
A report from BA Economics.
Which country is this?
Australia. This is what's happening right now.
Interesting. I'll look into that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard about it, so I don't know that point. But essentially what I'm saying is that everything that I've read has been saying that wind currently costs about 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Solar, it varies from about 6 to 10 cents depending on the technology of it.
Well, it's not reliable to use that metric. You have to look at it over the cost of its actual life cycle, what that actually ends up being.
Which
factoring
is the fact
things
that
like firming.
And how cheap is nuclear energy?
In a place like South Korea, it's incredibly cheap. And I mean, you mentioned there was some scandal involving dodgy parts. I mean, I need to look into that, but that isn't the only reason why it's so cheap. It was
What
cheap
is the other reason?
What's the other reason? They have the right mix in place. They have standardized designs that are replicated easily. And
No, it's because the power already exists there through huge government subsidy. And on top of this, the DIW just released a report.
They don't subsidize nuclear in South Korea. They don't.
No. I know they don't do it anymore, but what they did was they originally subsidized it to build those plants in the first place. So the DIW, which is a it's a think tank in Germany, they did this worldwide global study of nuclear power plants. On average, they have lost $7.7 billion. In fact, they couldn't find a single nuclear power plant when you put in all the government subsidies that were put into place originally. When you include all of that into the price, not a single one has ever turned a profit. Now, a lot of governments just give it over to a company and say, there you go, we've built all this for you, just like we're doing with fucking WestConnex at the moment. You can just profit from here on in. That definitely happens. But the actual loss has on average been $7.7 billion. Wind and solar is built within 1 to 3 years and turns a profit within 2 to 5 years. These are the studies.
Yeah, but you have to factor in the actual generation mix, which will be wind, solar, and whatever it takes to firm those things up. That's one thing.
But on top of that, you think that... Okay, so have you read the Royal Commission into Nuclear Power in Australia?
The Ziggy Switkowski report, 2006. I had a chance to look at that a while ago, yeah.
Do you know what Switkowski says about nuclear power now?
What?
He doesn't think that we should build it anymore. He thinks that the argument's over. He thinks renewables won.
Yeah, but when you're dealing with a situation where you have one highly propped up and subsidized industry versus one that's completely banned, to the point where you can't even have an investigative business case that costs a ton of money and there's a regulatory uncertainty around what the regulation will actually look like. I mean, it's a very smart and rational decision to say, well, I'm a private company. I see one thing that's completely off the table and will be a shit fight to even get on the table. I see another thing that the governments, Liberal and Labour, have to a significant degree been propping up. I'm going to back that horse. Of course I am. I'm a rational person. What I'm saying is let these things compete on an equal footing. Let's have an actual level playing field. And if solar and wind end up beating nuclear, if we suddenly have this massive shoot up in battery technology, where it goes from being 2 to 3 hours to being like, what needs to be, which
4 hours,
which is
give
about
it its credit.
So it's about 6/9 of the time. Is 6/9 is the factor of capacity that you have to provide to firm up these things.
But again, the energy operator
awesome.
thinks that the South Australian energy grid is now the most stable because of those batteries. Because it's all just about having a bunch of different generators as opposed to having a couple of big generators that if they fuck up, then too bad for you.
Well,
and in fact, they saved both Victoria and New South Wales twice after the Tesla battery was built because, again, because of climate change, these coal plants are overheating, which is a huge problem with power plants in America and France, by the way, because of all the heat waves that are happening now. They have to shut these plants down because they start overheating, which would be a huge problem in Australia as well because we're a very hot country. But last year, because of the Tesla batteries that were built, essentially Victoria and New South Wales were going, fuck, our coal plants are failing, what are we going to do? And then South Australia just went, I've got you covered, click, turned on the Tesla battery, saved them both from a blackout.
One of the reasons why we're seeing these plants retire and get decommissioned is because they are not able to turn a profit because of the renewables in the grid. So the renewables make coal and natural gas, and the company as a whole is making a massive profit because they're selling on both ends. But that generator that's fossil fuel powered, one, it costs a lot of money to turn it off and turn it on again, and during 30 to 33% of the time the wind and solar is producing energy, it has to be turned off. So that costs money.
Wait. Wind and solar costs money to turn off.
No. Natural gas. The coal and
gas,
natural gas.
yeah. Sorry.
So it costs money to turn it off and on. They have ongoing costs involving so much for climate change. That's a joke. That's a joke. Don't edit that to make me look bad.
No, zoom in on him. Zoom in on him. Put his name under. Where do you live? No.
Whoops. No, but seriously. So it costs money to turn them off and turn them on. And the wind and solar get first preference on the grid, and they're subsidized as well, whereas the coal part of the equation
to react to.
Well, yeah, but they only work 33% of the time, roughly. And then on top of that, so coal and natural gas, they have ongoing costs in terms of staffing costs and so on. Which means that they cost a significant amount to run. And this is one of the reasons why it's often not that easy to have them turn on to pick up the slack when you have a weather event that causes a wind farm to go offline.
Because of staffing?
No. Because of long-running costs, being able to have the people in place to turn it on and get it going.
Which is the same thing with a nuclear reactor.
Yeah, but with nuclear, you are able to provide that baseload power without the need to sort of mix it up with other different sources. Or you're able to do it so we're... Yeah. No,
but the thing is, the energy operator says, in fact, you'll find this globally, most energy operators now say that baseload power is a completely dated idea.
Yeah,
because
but that's
the
not
most
the real-world
stable
experience.
It is the real world experience because essentially what's happening is it's becoming so obsolete in South Australia, this idea of baseload power, which for anybody who doesn't know, it just means having like this constant supply of
reliable
minimum
power supply.
Right, reliable power supply, right? But essentially what they're saying is the most reliable grids on Earth are Denmark followed by Germany. Why? Because they have so much renewables, which means that they have many different generators, which means that if one of them screws up, it doesn't matter. They've got a bunch of them. So also when it comes to the fact that wind only generates about 33% of the time, that's true. But it's also a quarter of the price of nuclear power, which means that you can build 4 times as much and you can put it in different parts of the country and you can link them up.
Denmark and Germany have some of the highest electricity prices in the entire world. I think they're the highest. They're even higher than Australia.
Yes, and again, it's because of privatisation.
Oh, come on. You can't then deflect and say privatisation whenever that happens.
Go look in... That is the facts of the matter. You can go look into this...
Hey, listen. I did give you one example. I did give you a clear case where privatisation is not the issue, which is
where,
Australian experience. Victoria privatised their grid in the 90s, prices went down. Queensland, completely publicly owned, prices have been going up. It's not a here or there thing. Here's
that might be true.
Here's something we can agree on.
That might be true. That might be true, but that is definitely not the case in New South Wales, and that is definitely not the case in Japan, that is definitely not the case in Germany. And the reason, again, that France is a lot cheaper and everybody always goes to France and says that they've got cheap and reliable
70% of the energy is nuclear.
And it used to be 80.
Yep,
it's
but
been
it's
going
still
down
70.
by 10%.
Yeah, it's because of political lobbying. And the
is it because of political lobbying?
Oh yes, the anti-nuclear movement is extremely powerful, very well funded.
You don't think that the EDF has a bit of sway there?
EDF?
It's like it's the main organization that controls the majority of nuclear power in France, and it's mostly owned by the government, which again is going into it. And they are on record saying to the government, do not invest in renewables, do not put money into this, you're going to have to quash this because we're losing ground on this. As a result of it, because even in France, where they have some of the cheapest nuclear prices on earth because there's just so much nuclear energy there, I think it's currently at about 38 euros per megawatt hour in France for nuclear energy. Renewables is currently at 15 to 20 euros.
That doesn't factor in the costs of the firming.
What do you mean it doesn't factor in the costs of the firming?
It's a spot cost. It doesn't factor in. It doesn't.
The fact of the matter is that the EDF are now losing to smaller firms that are running off solar and renewable technology 100,000 customers
France
a
also
year.
heavily subsidizes the renewables, so there's that as well. They do.
I know, but you can't say that it's the same.
Take this out of the equation.
You can't take it out of the equation.
It's
obviously, you can always point to the fact that everything is being subsidized, and you know what? To a degree, when it comes to building national energy grids, obviously you should be subsidizing it. What I'm saying is that these energy grids are being built in spite of subsidies in certain countries. Another good example is in the US. The Trump administration passed in 2017 this law that said that you have to prioritize coal and nuclear energy over renewables to energy operators. So the energy operators were just like, well, this is some crony capitalist shit. Like, we want the renewable energy because it's faster to respond to. Even then, renewables were still cheaper. So in 2018, they passed a law that said you have to pay the price that they determined coal and nuclear is worth. That's the level of interference in the market that is happening in the US.
In America, yeah.
In America.
You got agreement from me about crony capitalism. You got agreement from me about the fact that you always will have private companies and rich billionaires funding whatever dog they've decided back in the fight. I mean, I can make the same argument for renewables. I mean, in Australia, you got that Atlassian guy, a multi-billionaire, who's setting up a so-called NGO so he can go and lobby for more renewable subsidies and that sort of thing. So,
why do you hate renewables?
I actually don't. I'm just look.
But you look
for
so
the same,
angry when you say it.
I don't like crony capitalism. I don't like rich people getting handouts from the government. That's honestly the reason why.
Fair point.
Right?
Nobody does.
Yeah.
But the whole point is, what I'm saying is that this is the first power grid that is being built without subsidies. Nuclear technology has never been built without government subsidies. Coal has never been built without government subsidies. This is why even owners, distributors of coal in Australia now are saying, we don't want to build any more coal plants. They are actually lobbying the Liberal government, put more money into renewables, please, because it benefits us, because it's cheaper to produce and it gets a quicker return on investment, right?
Yeah.
But who are the people that are advocating nuclear technology in this country? Who are the biggest proponents of it? Do you know who spent $600 million on lobbying the government?
For nuclear.
Since, I think, the 80s. Until very recently, actually. It's the mining industry. Why does the mining industry want it? Because Australia has a lot of uranium. That's why they want nuclear power.
Yeah, but they'd rather export it than use it here.
But they'd also like to have other
that.
markets open to them, right? Because they see that if you have more markets, more money.
But you can lobby the government to extract uranium and to permit more mining licenses without saying anything about producing nuclear. In fact, that second thing is a massive uphill fight. It's a lot easier to lobby the government saying, "Oh, look, let's mine." No, look, there's lobbying that goes both ways, right? But from what I've seen, some of the most significant, well-funded, well-resourced lobbying is in the renewable sector, precisely because to a large degree, precisely because to a large degree, it still allows you to get a good price for your fossil fuel power.
More than the Minerals Council. You think that they're more effective than the Minerals Council?
Do you honestly think that the Minerals Council doesn't like the idea of renewables? Really?
Yes, I absolutely do think that.
What do you need in order to construct wind turbines and set up solar farms? You need minerals.
But you know what else you need to on coal plants and
you also need coal-fired power to firm up those renewables. So they're winning on multiple
nuclear power.
fields.
What do you get? You get uranium.
Yeah. You get uranium. Right. So
the Minerals Council wants it. And
no,
this is
my
just
point is
not
they
my
want
opinion.
many
The whole
things.
point
They
is,
want many things. Yeah. So you can't say this is just the Minerals Council pushing one thing over the others because they're pushing everything. They represent
the Minerals Council spent $100 million getting rid of the Labor government in 2013 because of their carbon tax and because of their renewable energy guarantee. What do you mean? This is just a public record.
You think they're that powerful? If they're that powerful, then why is it
that
the Liberal government that you say is controlled by them? Why do you think that Liberal government actually is not implementing half the things they want. Do you know the
do you mean
Minerals?
half the
Do you
things they
realize the Minerals Council strongly support the National Energy Guarantee? They were one of the
Now
biggest
they do,
proponents
and
of it.
why do they?
Oh,
support it now?
they did
Because
back
they
when
changed,
they did
huh?
back when it was proposed as well. They were pushing for it, and then
And
it
why
got
is that?
dumped.
Because of the National Energy Guarantee. What does it guarantee?
Well, obviously gives them certainty about how the mix is going to look going forward. It gives them
Exactly.
firming capacity and all that stuff.
Boom.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
Because it firmed in the fact that they would be needing a certain amount of coal over the next few years. That was why.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Partly
But the
to
difference
firm up
is,
renewables.
yeah, and so
Yes.
why didn't they support a carbon tax? Why didn't they support a price on carbon of any kind, even an ETS?
Oh, no, they're not. I'm not saying they're going to support every single one of the policies that favor renewables. What I'm saying is they support the
But man,
interest
like,
mining industry.
so
You can't
the
say they're
energy
one over the others.
They
You
do
can't-
though, but look, if you're going to support renewables, why wouldn't you support a price on carbon?
You realize
and if you want
NEG had
nuclear
an
power,
emissions
that's
reduction standard built in that favored renewables. It had subsidies, indirect subsidies built into it. Like
What-
it
what hap-
favored the
what's-
neg. The neg favored renewables.
No, okay. Look,
Yeah, it had an
I
emissions
can
reduction
unpack that in a
standard.
second, but what I will use as an example for this is the fact that South Australia commissioned a royal commission into nuclear power in 2016.
The fuel cycle commission, right?
Mhm.
Right. Yeah.
What did they find about it? Do you know?
You'll need to tell me what you're asking me to refer to. Like what?
Oh,
claim-
sorry.
what-
About
yeah.
like the okay. So
Yeah.
with nuclear power, they were saying that when it comes to nuclear power, you're going to have to put on a price on carbon for it to even be competitive with coal. What is that going to do to renewables? Make it even more attractive if you put a price on carbon. This is what the pro-nuclear lobby is saying. They were the ones that were actually pushing for this commission. They were the ones that were writing it. Obviously, they were saying, you know, like, oh yeah, waste, that's not a problem. Oh, the fact that they overheat, that's fine. What they essentially were saying is it's too expensive to set up a nuclear power plant here. And on top of that, they were finding that they'll have one set up by like the late 2030s.
I think
At a minimum. At a minimum.
I think
And
it's
there was other
interesting that
economists that were saying there's like
you sort of-
2040 that they'll be setting it up for.
You sort of just contradicted yourself. On one hand, you said, "Oh, look, the Minerals Council is pushing this nuclear thing," while opposing a carbon tax, and then you've said, "Oh, but the nuclear lobbyists are coming out saying that they want a carbon tax, you know, so that can benefit them." So really, there is a massive contradiction in those two things.
No. Because there's certain mining companies within the Minerals Council that want nuclear energy. I can't remember the name of the mining company once, but one of them owns just a third of the uranium mines in the country, right? So when it comes to the Minerals Council, you have competing interests, but there's certain
Sure.
mining companies that definitely want nuclear energy coming through. But the general opinion of the Minerals Council, and they just had this huge coup that happened recently, and they've just replaced their former CEO with another one who's more moderate and believes that climate change is a thing. That's nice, you know, but when it comes to the people that want nuclear power implemented, it's certain mining companies that want that. And they were the ones that were pushing for the Royal Commission, and they were looking into it, and basically they came to the conclusion that it's too expensive to build, and on top of that it's going to take too long. And by the time they do that, so for instance, the renewable energy target in South Australia in 2012, I think it was 2012, it could have even been earlier, but they had a target of 50% by 2030. By 2016, it got to 70% because they thought, wow, we're smashing these targets. Now it is at 50%. So it's like 11 years ahead of schedule. And so by the time that they've even, you know, by the time we've even discussed putting on a nuclear power plant in South Australia, it would have been a net exporter of renewable energy by that time.
Meanwhile,
This
power
is how
prices are
fast it's happening.
skyrocketing, and
But
people
that's
are complaining.
not
People
the
are
case.
angry. That's literally, it's reality. It's happening in front of us.
I will look at those stats again.
Please.
But the last time that I did look at those stats, it was showing that the price of power in South Australia, ever since they've been introducing renewables, has been decreasing.
It wouldn't be the long run cost of power. It would be the spot price. Or I mean, when wind is online in that specific moment, at certain stages there were times when the price of electricity went negative, right? That happens as well, right? The issue is, when is peak demand actually happening? It's happening at night. It's happening at times when wind and solar aren't usually online or on the grid. And over the course of its entire life cycle, when you have this mix of wind, solar, and then the things that you need to firm it up, the costs are radically different. When you have this extra investment in network assets, so you can keep the grid reliable and stable, that also pushes the cost down. That also works in the cost stack. So a lot of these studies, a lot of these claims are made without including any of that stuff.
What a patriot. in his little shitty Suzuki.
What did he say? I know.
He just yelled the Liberal government at me. Cheeky bastard.
Oh, well.
Anyway, you were saying, I can't remember now.
Fuck, where was that?
I can't remember.
Yeah, so a lot of those figures aren't actually based on what it would actually cost to work them into the grid over time. What happens is, look, when renewables first enter the grid, when you're sort of moving from about 0% to about 10 or 20%, the costs start to go down because you're able to take advantage of the fact that you're using this free energy that costs nothing to absorb. But when you start getting around 50%, that's when things get a little more difficult. At that stage,
That's not
when the
even
costs
what
start
the
adding
Liberal
up.
government in South Australia currently thinks. They're going full steam ahead with it, and they're going to 100%. And it's also the same in... The ACT was run 98% on renewable energy last year. Tasmania was run on
that's actually
95%.
That's actually not correct. What they did was they bought...
Oh, sorry, it's run by 80%
No,
that's
no.
produced there, and then they bought the excess. So it was another around 15%, but they're well on target for reaching 100%.
Yeah,
And on top of this, there's 100 cities across the planet now that are currently run on 70% or more renewable energy. And there's 40 cities, over 40 cities that are run on 100% renewable energy. So it's possible, it's happening now.
Well, yeah, but that when you say 100%, what they're doing is it's not actually 100%.
It doesn't matter though, it's still happening.
Yeah, but it's because they're buying up that energy from other places. It's
Yeah.
it's a little bit of sophistry involved. The best country in terms of this
like,
is
it's
Norway.
there. Yeah,
Norway and
why?
Iceland, because they're able to back up renewables with hydroelectric power. So they've done it really well because that topography is suitable for it. But in Australia, you don't
Oh,
have
that was
those
years ago, though,
features.
wasn't it? That happened even before people gave a shit about climate change. I suppose people don't give a
Well,
shit
I mean,
about it now.
it's the status quo. I mean, but how long it's been, I'm not certainly sure. But for the last 10 years at
But
least. I'm
Texas,
sure.
for instance, which is just such a red state in the US, they're now the biggest exporter of wind in the country, and they have
It's
so
a very
much
windy
wind.
place.
It was a very windy place, and they have so much of it that there is a period, I can't remember when it starts, I think it kicks in at 9 p.m. and I think it's till like 6 a.m. in the morning where they're just giving away free energy.
Yeah, at that
This
time.
is how cheap it's getting. I don't understand how you keep saying that it's really expensive
Because
when
that-
all of the
because-
statistics are
because this is
showing. You can look
sophistry.
this up. But why is this sophistry? Because you can look at the pricing of it. It is over and over again. It goes Citibank, Lazard, the Royal Commission
And
in South
I've
Australia.
explained why those claims are incredibly flawed. I've repeated myself a few times on this. It doesn't work in the actual cost over the actual life cycle. It doesn't work in the cost of the entire electricity mix that needs to work.
Where is
in
your
that way.
real world example of this? Because I've given out
It's-
quite a few of them.
If you look at the actual tables on prices in Australia, how they've gone up, how they've fluctuated. Look at the report from the ACCC on electricity price in this country, where they say the transition to renewables has been badly botched because it's just been shoved in at the
Because
rate it's
of,
been shoved
as
in.
that guy said, the Liberal government.
Because
Sorry,
of
I got to
successive
feed
state
the
and federal.
fans. Anyway.
Yeah, look, successive state and federal governments. Look, people are citing the Netherlands as a great example of, renewable energy, wind and so on. They import a significant amount of electricity, as I understand it, from France, where most of the plants are nuclear.
Who is the biggest exporter in Europe at the moment? Do you know?
Who?
Germany. They're the biggest exporter of energy.
Yeah.
They surpassed France.
Who has the most expensive electricity in Europe? Germany and Denmark. The two examples that you
Yeah,
keep
but I've
shoving in.
explained already that you can look these statistics up. The ones that Michael Schellenberger was using. First off, he was
I'm not
saying that it's
using
like
his, but
10
anyway,
times. Well, it's all this same idea that Germany's power is more expensive because of renewables, but it has
Yes.
always been extremely expensive. And it is because of the way that the energy sector there works.
But
It
it's
is run on
objectively gotten
privatisation.
even more expensive. And I've given you examples.
But it objectively
mean,
has not.
How do you explain? No, it objectively has. And objectively, privatization does not equal magically power prices go up. It depends on how it's done. In Victoria,
Yeah, it
was
depends on how
well.
it's done. But
In
that's
Queensland,
the
it's
way that it's
governmental,
done
and
in
you've had the
Germany.
same
Yeah,
issues.
but the way that it's done in Germany, the way that it's done in Japan, because they have so much power in these countries, they can make the regulations suit them, which is exactly what they've done. And so when it comes to France and Germany, so if you're going to be, so first of all, just accept this. Germany is able to export more energy than France is. In fact, France had to rely on Germany more ever since that they've added more renewables into their mix than France has had to rely on. Germany has had to rely on France.
Yeah, but you
This
can
has
only
happened ever
export
since. And
that.
this is because of that stable amount of energy that comes out of nuclear power plants. And on top of the fact that we're talking about that you have to turn them off because they overheat. But on top of that, they're just constantly exporting a certain amount of energy They're
But you
producing
can
a certain
only-
amount of energy,
Yeah, which
right?
they only
And
export
it's hard
when
to,
they're
it's hard
able
to improve.
They only export that during the active period, during the live period, when conditions are good. It doesn't work in the cost over its entire cycle. Now look, one of the good things with wind and solar is that at those certain periods, you have an excess of energy. That means that you have a surplus. You can export it. This is why if battery technology is able to catch up, then these things could become very attractive. But the fact is that isn't happening. It's not going to happen for a significant amount of time. In fact, if you want it to happen, then you should really be taking a lot of these subsidies that are artificially propping these things up and putting them into research, so maybe that innovation can come to line quicker. My thing in all of this is let's have these different sources compete with each other on a level playing field. Right, let's do it transparently and create an environment ideally where you undermine or lower the amount of crony capitalism there is, where one energy source lobbies the government to screw over the other energy source or give them an artificial advantage. Let's have a level playing field. In this country, you don't have that. Nuclear is completely banned. Can't even think about it. I think if you have that neutral level playing field, let's see what it looks like. It might involve, I don't doubt that wind and solar will be a part of it. I don't doubt that nuclear will be part of it. Coal and natural gas will slowly begin, perhaps
Well, again,
fading out over time.
Zukowski, who ran the report under Howard, said that we should be backing renewables, and on top of that, the Royal Commission also said that we should be backing renewables. It was about finding if it was cheap enough to even put in nuclear power.
Zukowski also said that smaller modular reactors, as the innovations happen, and they're happening right now around the world,
No, let's not go
would be
down that
viable for
path.
Australia.
Come on.
Oh, he said that. That's in the report.
Yeah, but man, it's science fiction. It's basically saying, like,
it's the
you know
science.
who had the
Don't you
really
believe the
good
science?
energy source? Dune. It's like, dude, we can't go
science
into
reality.
SMRs now. It's not science reality. There's no such thing as an SMR. There's prototypes. They're on paper. People are building them as a prototype. That is not the same as having a commercially viable plant.
Yeah, but I could point out those studies that claim that renewables will provide complete baseload by 2050 and say that's fiction too. Right? It's feel-good predictions down the track.
But the thing is,
usually
the
funded
SMRs
by
have been
people with
saying
some
this
sort of
since
interest.
the 70s, and that has not happened. And even the UN, who was originally saying in 2010 that nuclear energy has to be part of the mix to get to the even the targets that they were implementing back then, which just aren't going to stop climate change anyway. But they were saying that we need nuclear to be part of that mix. Now what the ICPP is saying... IPCC, sorry. Now what they're saying is in 2018, they're saying that renewables has come so far in that time. Nuclear energy has not. This is the consensus of it. It's also part of the World Nuclear Industry Status Report. Essentially what they're saying is that nuclear power is just on a death spiral. It's too expensive, it's too dangerous, and so as a result of that, you're seeing more and more that, in fact, renewables for the first time, I think in 2018, surpassed how much energy they're producing than nuclear is in terms of the total mix that is not fossil fuel power, right? This happened in 2018. It's only going to continue.
So two things. So number one, while nuclear has been scaled down in places like France and Germany, it's being scaled up throughout a lot of Asia.
Where?
Taiwan, India, UAE, China's expanding
India has
it.
not been doing that.
Oh no,
I don't know
it's
about
part of their
Taiwan.
long-term.
I don't know about. Yeah, I know it's part of their
yeah.
long-term thing, but they've been saying they have not met their 2000 targets when it comes to it. They were saying they were going to have 10,000 megawatts of energy coming from nuclear power by 2000. They're at 7,000 megawatts now.
Look,
They're not even going to reach it by 2020.
I was born in India, and they have not met their targets on a number of different things.
Yeah,
so
but
let's
what
be
have
fair.
they smashed their targets in? Wind, baby. They reckon now they've got targets of 100,000. They're currently at 30,000 megawatts of energy, while they've got 7,000 megawatts coming from nuclear
They're
power.
also
And this
importing
is
a lot
not
of coal
without
from
any of the
Australia and
level of
mining a lot more of
subsidies.
their own coal
Yeah,
as
but
well.
that's got nothing to do
Yeah.
with nuclear power. Like, I don't obviously.
Wait,
like,
it
I'm not
doesn't, but
sitting
I'm
here
saying
just
this
being
is an
like, you know what's
argument
awesome? Coal. Like, what?
Yeah, no, that's not. I'm just saying that's not an argument necessarily against nuclear power.
Why isn't that an argument against nuclear power? They have not met their targets. They're like so behind on their targets on that, but when it comes to wind and solar, they're smashing their targets.
They've got a few reactors coming online soon, and in fact, their costs
Yeah,
are going to be
but
lower than a lot of other countries because they use natural uranium.
They might have some power plants coming online, but they're 20 years behind their target.
Look, maybe the target wasn't the best target, but look, that doesn't change the fact that nuclear should still be a part of the mix, and
Why?
it is, and they're
Why doesn't that
expanding it.
change
It's
it?
fact. China's
Because at the same time,
expanding
now
it.
they're thinking at this rate, we'll have 100,000 megawatts at the time that we'll have 10,000 megawatts from nuclear power. That is what the Indian government is now predicting.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other. It just means that they haven't met a target on one specific thing. I think that's sort of cherry picking on this. The other.
Don't use the word cherry picking.
I am, because it's happening, right?
I am.
What is the
I
other
think
point
they're
I wanna
forever.
make?
Hey,
Oh,
honestly,
yes.
I think at this
Yeah.
point, like,
Yeah.
we've come to the crossroad, and I 100% agree on this one point, all right? If you remove subsidies from all of these, let's see what happens.
Fuck yeah.
Including,
Done.
do you agree with this?
Yep.
To remove the subsidy that the US government gives to nuclear power, which is that it passed the Price-Anderson Act, I think it's called, which essentially means that nuclear power doesn't have to insure itself. So it has to buy its own insurance. If a meltdown happens, the nuclear power plants have to pay for it, not the people that didn't do shit about it, not the taxpayer.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
You didn't change my mind. But anyway, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I had fun too. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for that.
Thanks for coming.
Straight up. I was this close to joining Young Liberals, you don't even know. I was like this close. I was so fucking uneducated. These pompous pricks were like, oh yeah, I'll do an interview in a cafe with you in Sydney. I'm like, nah, fuck off. I like real life. It's not gonna fucking work there.
Good on you for sitting down. You got to say that to everybody who does. But yeah, it's a huge effort, isn't it, being relaxed? But look, honestly, it is. It's a brave thing for you to sit down, and you wanted to talk about Gen 4. Now, before we even get into it, I've just got to say, look, yeah, it's one of these things that theoretically it could be good, but can we both just agree at this point that it is just theory? We're talking about Gen 3 reactors because that's what's commercially available and what's on market. When it comes to Gen 4 reactors, none of them exist, and we've just got the prototypes of them and have for years. Is that what we're agreeing on? I don't know why I've just put all these words in your mouth. So. Yeah, go.
I'll say somewhat. I think the all right, okay, fair. Mostly, for the most part, because there are elements which have been implemented in commercial reactors. The BN600, I believe it is, which is in Russia. But I guess I'll just state my argument.
Sorry. Yeah, instead of me just saying, all right, here's a long paragraph, agree with it, we're done. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, look, I agree that for actual power generation, like nuclear plants, it's just really a disaster, like compared to most renewables. I'll say certain.
Now get out of the chair.
No. Yeah. Wait, but that's not what I'm arguing for. Basically, there are certain utilities that you can get from Gen 4 plants, like which have been proven to actually, as in like real prototypes, like do exist. Yes, they're not commercially available yet, but like the earliest estimates, are just 2 years away, from actual commercial viability.
What is this? Which one?
So it's two. One is like the very high temperature reactors, and the other one are the sodium cooled reactors.
Sodium cooled reactors. Now,
Yeah.
because when it comes into Gen 4, and every time I hear the word Gen 4, I just trail out because after that it just goes, if you put this proton here instead of this neutron, look. I'll be honest here. I failed science in high school. I don't know, but when I'm just basically all I know about is like policy implementation, economics of it, and the environmental history of nuclear reactors. So when it comes to the future, I don't know that much. What I do know is that Gen 4 ideas have been around since the 70s and haven't been implemented yet, and that they keep pushing them forward. So when it comes to, were you talking about sodium reactors just then?
Yeah, sodium.
So sodium reactors do exist now, don't they?
Yeah.
And they have been implemented, but they're just tend to catch fire every now and then.
Yeah.
Is that the deal with them?
Well, they are the ones that can catch on fire, and they also can. I mean, I'm not kind of arguing against myself here, but they can.
Thank you for doing so.
But anyway, I'm trying not to be a sophist, but yeah, they can also release like argon gas that it just suffocates you.
Okay.
Well, anyway, it only suffocates you, if there's a
that's
gas
fine.
leak.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not too
It's
bad.
not the worst way to go.
Yeah, you don't even feel it for the most part. It's still air in your lungs.
Which is actually another fact that I would like to pull up while I was thinking about it, is that when people talk about, oh yeah, this power plant isn't going to melt down because of X, Y, and Z, first of all, they said that about the power plant at Chernobyl, they said it about 3 Mile Island, they said about Fukushima, they all melted down. But the other thing is that what people don't know about them is that they just sometimes release heaps of radiation for no reason, and they don't measure how much it is. So a good example of that was in the UK. There was a day where Greenpeace was measuring around this pipeline for one of the plants in the UK that is expelling radiation into the ocean. Now, they have a permit for how much they're supposed to release in a year. Greenpeace was just doing it to see what impact it's had on the sea life there. Just on that one day, they released as much as they're supposed to release in a year in one day. And then, as a result of the inquest that happened after it, they admitted that they just don't check that. They just go, oh, yeah, we didn't know, sorry. And so apparently this happens a lot. So another thing that when it comes to all of these new technologies is that theoretically it works, but to quote the Simpsons, in theory, communism works. It's like, I think a lot of these things, when they're actually implemented into the real world, when it comes to how they're regulated, trusting that they're going to be regulated properly, what's going to happen to the waste that you have to deal with 100,000 years when the most powerful civilization, Rome, lasted 1,000. So just 100 Romes, guys. You know, like all of these things are factors that aren't thought about. So when it comes to these two that you're talking about now, my first question, I guess, is like, what do you do with the waste?
Well, here's the thing. That's actually why I'm advocating for, I might have the actual name written down if you want me to
oh yeah,
say.
Go ahead and do it, because honestly, I am really interested in this subject now. I don't know why, but Warhammer, nukes and snakes. I'm a sad man. Yeah.
I'm thinking,
Just sighing at my despair, thank you.
What does that say about the deeper aspects of your psyche?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, before I reflect on
anyway.
myself too much, can you...
It doesn't need to become a therapy session.
Yeah, I know. And you look like you would be a sick therapist as well, just saying.
You're not the only person who said that.
Yeah? Well, add me to the list.
Alright.
And tell me what was on that list.
Not the information I was looking for. So don't worry. Anyway,
What was on it?
It was just like a bunch of basic like notes, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's on like short notice, we'll say. Anyway, okay, so basically.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So I'm actually arguing for like the next generation of sodium cooled like plants, which they have passive cooling as well, which is something that very helps a lot. Is it doesn't need to be actively engaged. The actual power plant doesn't need to be operating for the thing for it to shut down. It doesn't need to be like manually shut down or like automatically shut down due to like the viscosity of the solvent and the lack of reactivity.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are different types of passive
So
cooling as well.
this is what I was very scared about with this debate, because I knew that a bunch of people would come up and just be like, well, what about the sodium chloride high temperature reactor? Oh no, you're talking about the sodium chloride low temperature reactor. All of these jargony words, which is another problem with the nuclear industry, is that it's been 50 years of them coming up with nuke speak terms to make all of these dangerous elements of nuclear power seem pretty routine. One of them is just, for example, the fact that when engineers build it, they have a term, and I can't even remember it now because, again, it's just these, look, I'm a stupid person. I will admit it straight out, but like I am not nuclear physicist level of intelligence, but my argument is that they are a very specialized type of intelligence, and when it comes to the real world, and all of these other factors have to be implemented in it, their theory doesn't pan out as well as it does on a piece of paper. So when it comes to these kind of things, I will look up what you just said about
passive cooling.
The passive cooling plant, because I've got it recorded. I'll have to look this up in my own time. But from what I've seen with every single one of these Gen 4 reactors, there's all of these fantastical promises about them. Say that it's, I don't know, fast breeder, SMR, fusion, all of this stuff. They keep saying that all of these things are like, you can just put them on seawater. What could go wrong there? There's all these different ideas that they have for them. And a lot of these, we've got like a 50-year history of them saying like, it's just around the corner. Why do you think that this will happen in the next 2 years?
All right. I can't actually say it's going to happen in the next 2 years.
Okay.
Though, anyway, I mean, they built a prototype in France, also the one that, they just gave up on.
All right, good start.
But
This seems to be the recurring story in Gen 4.
Yeah. Well, one of the arguments is that, all these European countries, they put billions of euros already in the research. But here's the thing, I'm only arguing for the sodium-cooled reactors, like the Gen 4 ones. All right, just for one specific utility, not even energy generation, you know, it's just a side effect. Purely because you can use it to transmute current radioactive waste, which, you know, takes, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years to properly decay. You can use it, you know, as fuel and reduce it down to waste that will decay in 300, 400, 500 years.
Well, see, I commend you a lot for that, and I think that that is the way that people that are interested in nuclear technology should be looking at it. Not, how do we build more things that can pump out more shit that we don't know what to deal with? How about we deal with the 400,000 tons that we currently have and have no idea what to do with, and have numerous instances of environmental leaks, even though the NRC, because they're in bed with the energy industry, have just been trying to put those things aside. But anyway, I think that that's a really good way that you're thinking about it in that terms. My problem with it is that fast breeder reactors have been talking about that for years. And I think even breeder reactors were the same thing. It was just like, we can run on certain elements of waste that Gen 3 reactors produce and Gen 2 reactors produce, right? They don't. They just don't. They were saying that there was going to be thousands of them in 2000. This was in the 70s under the Nixon administration. Well, we're now past the 2000s, and they're now saying that we'll have a commercially viable fast breeder reactor by 2050. And Bill Gates is saying the same thing about his new technology, that it runs on spent fuel. But a lot of these designs, as we're pointing out here, all promise the same thing. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, and I really, God, for the things that I've heard about nuclear waste, I really hope you're right. But I don't think you are. Sorry to put you in that position.
I haven't looked at the actual, like, you know, chemistry. I didn't get that far in my research, so I can't say, like, well, it's actually these specific chemical reactions, you know, that will, like, you know, reduce it down. I'm sure. Well, I'm sure they exist. I don't have any proof, but, you know, maybe I could, you know, send some links after. I was looking at, you know, I was actually looking at looking at scientific articles to do this research. I wasn't just looking at, you know, like, media articles. But, you know, again, I didn't get that far. But,
see, this is the whole thing. And you will see this over and over again, and I honestly commend it, because you seem like you are a smarter human being than me. For instance, just the very fact that I had to borrow my cameraman's jumper. I'm too stupid to look into the future about even weather, right? I'm a moron. But what I think is that a lot of these very intelligent people make a lot of stupid mistakes. And, you know, another one, for example, is the fact that they were doing nuclear testing in the 50s, even though there was a very real threat that they thought that it could burn up the atmosphere, and they did it anyway. Or, for instance, when there was, in Alabama, I think it was one of those, you know, ding-a-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding states. They've got a nuclear reactor there. This was a couple of years before 3 Mile Island. These are nuclear safety technicians. This is why when people say to me all the time, oh, you're just against the nuclear industry because you think it's like The Simpsons. If you do enough research, you realize it's exactly like The Simpsons. There's so many instances of safety technicians falling asleep. Sounds safe, like, you know, just in the middle of the night. Or, for instance, the fact that, what was something else that I was thinking about from The Simpsons? Yeah, just the fact that they just vent gas, just like how they did out of that scarecrow's head. That is scarily real to what happens in the nuclear industry. And the fact that they, you know, you have Mr. Burns just ignoring environmental reports. Exactly what happens all the time. Now, a really good example of that was, in the 70s, there was a nuclear reactor where there was engineers, safety technicians, you know, just like this isn't rocket science, this isn't nuclear science, these are nuclear scientists. And they were checking for gas leaks in this power plant. You know how they were checking for gas leaks? With a candle. So it went on fire for a week. And then they said sorry, and no one went to jail. This is the industry we're talking about. You know, there's a lot of, another example that springs to mind is when there was this rocket that was, satellite that was between Russia and the US that had been worked on for years. And they were going to put it into the air. Again, rocket scientists. Put it into the air, cost $135 million, just went up in smoke. Everybody was wondering what the hell happened. They looked through the calculations. I was just like, but the calculations are perfect. They then realized that the Russians were doing the calculations in the metric system and the Americans were doing the calculations in the imperial system. But they're rocket scientists. But they make dumb decisions all the time. And it's the same thing with all of these safety failures. When you come to these 57 mistakes in the since Chernobyl, most of them have been minor, but some of them have been, you know, Fukushima, triple meltdown. A lot of these instances, what happens when there's a safety failure rate is actually the main safety components stay online the whole time, and the safety technicians do their job most of the time. There's a lot of instances of them, and most of these accidents happen late at night because they're getting tired, which is another thing with, you know, human beings run these things when they always go, yeah, but they always fail because of human error. Yeah, but who runs these things? Who do you think runs it? Like B1 and B2? Well, B1 and B2 are humans. It's probably a bad example. I don't know, Widget the World Watcher, if anyone remembers that show that I barely remember myself. But you know, like 57 of these accidents, and what usually happens is because these are extremely complicated machines, as I'm sure you're very aware, right? These safety components that are not within the main frame of the main safety features that they're supposed to be looking at, just little things here and there start malfunctioning, and because they've been running for a long time, they start adding up, and then it leads to an actual catastrophe, or it leads to an actual failure. And so when it comes to Gen 4 and stuff like that, I'm not convinced that that's ever not going to be the case. They're still going to be extremely complicated machines, right? They're never just going to be this fold-out chair, are they?
Yeah,
it's always going to be really difficult, and you're just going to have to rely on the fact that it's just going to work 100% of the time, because, you know, and then we'll have great cheap energy, apparently, even though it's not, but, you know, like, we will have all this great energy until a meltdown happens. So I don't trust Gen 4 is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, you know, just a quick point in regards to people falling asleep. Wouldn't be a problem if they, you know, provided you know, ample stimulants to workers working at night.
What, speed?
Well, speed's just one of many.
Touche. You know what? You've changed my mind. Maybe. But honestly, you know what? I will look into that because I do have obsessive fascination with the nuclear industry now. Basically because I think that it's a secret fossil fuel industry.
Right.
And the other thing is, you know, I am actually available to the idea that if you can give me something that can guarantee that there's not going to be a meltdown, which I have failed to see so far, because when you read these things and then you read the counter argument, you see that there's other people that are just as qualified saying no, but there's this, and this problem, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I commend you at the very least for wanting it to get rid of nuclear waste, which is the third biggest environmental problem we have. It'd be climate change, nuclear meltdowns that we have to still manage, and then the waste that we still have to manage.
Yeah, well, honestly, it's a monstrous waste of money to just use these things for energy production when, you know, there's like hundreds of millions of dollars of like research and development, you know, like in the minimum, just for like building one, you know, plant with like a superior design. And then, you know, you have the other technologies that, you know, as you've, you know, said, already being like implemented. But as far as like meltdowns, look, you know, I wish I knew more. I wish I'd like been able to do more research. But supposedly, like,
it's alright. You probably have a life.
Yeah. I wish.
Well, you've got a suit. You're probably a somebody.
That's from Turkey.
Right, so it was less than this.
Had weird labels on the outside to like cut off to make it look half presentable.
I know those ones. Yeah, those photos that look even worse than Lowe's photos. Yeah.
Yeah, but supposedly the way that with the next generation sodium plants, the way that they're encased, you basically don't even. Well, anyway, you're saying that, you know, there are experts, you know, who will like disagree. I don't have enough research to argue for it. You know, supposedly, you know, everything is like properly encased to the point where you don't actually need active safety technicians. You know, like when like something
okay,
is, like,
all right.
Up. Anyway, whatever.
I'm really shit scared already.
Yeah,
but I'll look into this. But yeah, okay, I'll definitely look into that. But again, this is a point that I cannot stress enough. regulation councils worldwide said that the explosion that happened at Fukushima was impossible, which is a supersonic explosion. They said that that could not happen. And every single nuclear reactor that is currently online would not be able to withstand that type of explosion. I wish I was smart enough to remember what it's called. But they say this stuff a lot of the time. They say all of these things of it's much safer now. It's not the same reactor as Chernobyl, and I would fucking hope not. But it's like
Right.
like there's just because it's improved doesn't mean it's safe.
Yeah, right.
Right. But anyway, thank you for sharing that with me.
Wait, okay. So
No, you've had your time. No.
I was gonna say, so I've got one other argument,
Yeah, okay.
right? And this is actually already been implemented, and that's actually I've got two other arguments.
Sure.
Anyway, I won't take up too
Yeah,
much
you can
time,
if you want. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So the first one is because you mentioned that sodium-cooled reactors already exist. So the BN600 in Russia, it was actually part of a treaty. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Basically, America and Russia, they agreed that they would transmute their weapons-grade plutonium down, using like these specific types of plants to get rid of their stash of weapons-grade plutonium, which the amount that they have, I think it's just Russia has enough for 17,000 nuclear warheads.
Yeah.
Yep. And
America would have 80 times that, but
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
go,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
yes,
basically, another argument, for nuclear power, not even to use it again, like not for power generation, because you've got other things that you can use, but just another utility for it. You can use it to transmute, to like sequester, stocks of weapons-grade plutonium.
Well, I don't know if this is the exact reactor that we're talking about here, but if this is the breeder reactor that they're using, that caught on fire 15 times. It was using salts.
Okay.
And so there a lot of these, and it's the same thing. Japan tried to do this. In fact, they set up their breeder reactor, I think in the 80s. It took them 15 years to reboot after it fucked up that much. And Britain, US, they all tried to do breeder reactors for years and then just thought, no, that's it. So I don't know if this is the same one that's happening in that's online in Russia at the moment. I still think that one is online, but it is littered with problems. And every time these things catch on fire and they say that there's a mild amount of radiation that goes into the air, man,
It's Russia.
I don't want to live there, Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And it's look, I could go into Chernobyl about that as well, but yeah, look, we're talking about Gen 4, not Gen 1 or whatever it was, so. But, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
and what's the other one?
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, I also just want to say, again, like arguing against myself, to be fair, America just backed out on the treaty. They said, it costs too much money to do this. And then so, like, Russia's still operating the plant.
Drain the swamp. Yeah.
So Russia's still operating that plant, but, they're not using their weapons-grade plutonium in that. They're saving that for nuclear warheads. All right. Okay.
Well,
So
you are truly a master arguer, aren't you? You changed your own mind. No, but man, honestly, I do appreciate how honest you are about it, and I think that you're coming from a good place as well. I think I really think that is the way that the entire nuclear industry should be focusing all of its research and development into. How do you get rid of that fucking waste? And then there's going to be a bunch of people in the comments going, they could use it to clean salt water. Look at Fukushima, dick brain. But also on top of that, the other thing is, no, you can't. I've got an entire list of experts. I'll put it in the comments. All of these experts from UK, US, France, people who've won Nobel Prizes, they're saying exactly the same thing. There is no way to deal with nuclear waste as it currently stands. Sorry, I'm not even talking to you anymore. Sorry, I'll turn back to you. Thank you.
yeah, sorry. I mean, it helps that they're not paying me.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Very good.
All right. Okay, last argument. Okay, it's with very high temperature plants. That model of Gen 6, which are one of the most
Gen
reliable.
6?
So not Gen 6. Don't worry.
Yeah, all right.
I almost
Jesus, I was like, what
It's like
year
put out the
is
trump
this?
card.
Yeah.
Surprise.
You just find out that you're from the year 2070 and you time travel back just to... own me in
Yeah.
this argument.
I've learnt your common tongue. Yeah, so basically, now this utility as well, not for not for regular energy production, but it's a very efficient way to produce hydrogen, which is a fuel of the future. There are 3 models of commercially released hydrogen car, right now, and you can use renewables to produce hydrogen, but it's very inefficient because you have to actually create the heat, right? In these very high temperature reactors, the heat is already created to, they use, gonna pull out the terms again. I can't even pronounce it. Electrolysis. All right, I probably said it wrong. All
Probably.
right. Yeah, anyway.
You're going to get a lot of hate online. For
I'm
this,
happy
aren't
to
you?
be crucified,
Electrolyte addictive. Yeah, I know. But
Yeah. No,
I know what it's like. Go on.
Yeah. So basically, you could heat water into steam if you want it to be an efficient reaction, and to produce purified hydrogen that you can use as fuel. It's rocket fuel. It's car fuel, viable fuel for the future. That's doesn't emit, doesn't pollute. Doesn't have greenhouse emissions.
Hydrogen.
Yeah.
It does actually, but just a lot lower than pumping coal into the atmosphere. I think it's 4.4 grams. This is in nuclear power plants when they say that it's carbon free, which is a gross lie because the entire supply chain of it comes out being slightly better for the environment than gas turbines. In fact, if you replaced every nuclear power plant with gas turbines, the amount of emissions going up into the air would increase by 3.3%, which means that historically, throughout that entire time, it's saved us from 1 part per million going up into the atmosphere, which when you're 15 parts over 400, does it fucking matter if it's 16? We're screwed. Anyway, but when it comes to the hydrogen, it is a greenhouse gas,
Right.
but it's just much, much smaller in terms of it. I think it's, when it comes to nuclear power into the atmosphere, it's 4.4 grams per kilowatt hour going into the atmosphere from the steam emitting from it, as opposed to when it's coal, it's like 900 grams per kilowatt hour.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay.
I think that that's actually a very interesting point though, because you're right, hydrogen would be way better than petrol.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day as well, you have byproducts of combustion. Like even beyond like greenhouse gases, you have byproducts of combustion that just generally polluting. I can't name any of them, but that's not important.
Right. We're here to talk about fantasy technologies, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Let's get to the real issues.
Well, how do you
the
think they
ones that
power
don't
those
exist.
robots in Warhammer?
Yeah, actually, how do they power? I don't know. Is it something green? I'm assuming it's nuclear. Anyway, sorry. Should we just wrap it up here, or you got other stuff that you'd like to say
that's
about
good.
it? All right. Well, honestly, thank you. Thank you for your time, man.
Yeah.
So you agree with 90% of what I'm saying? So you 90% that nuclear power sucks?
No, not nuclear power sucks. Like your content in general.
Oh.
Your content, like,
Okay.
like, Palmer's like,
You roped me in on false pretenses.
Yeah, like, Palmer's fag McFuck facts,
Well, facts are facts.
Yeah, exactly. So, we like facts. So,
Yeah.
so here's the thing. Nuclear power doesn't suck, but it's probably not the best thing ever. It's not the best thing ever, but it should be an option. That's my argument. It
Okay,
should
so
be
you-
considered.
40% agree with me. Something around there. So I don't know why I'm giving this a percentage. Just
Anyways.
yeah. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. So right now, like, we've got Chernobyl and on was it Netflix or something, and also in general, people in Australia think, nuclear is like the most evil thing. We can't touch it.
Well, apparently the polling's almost 50-50.
Well, like now, like people are like, we should consider it, and that's the thing. Like, we should consider nuclear as an option because, like, coal and nuclear, coal's worse. Coal's worse for the air and stuff. Nuclear is just like releasing steam into the air. But yeah, we've got nuclear waste. It's not perfect, but it doesn't mean that you can't consider it as an optional research more into it because that right
Well,
now
this is
we
the whole
can't
thing. This is
really
what
do
I'm saying, is there's been 2 royal commissions into it, and both of them came back with pretty much the same conclusion. Can't do it. Or we can do it, but circumstances would need to change greatly. For instance, there need to be like a price on carbon. You know, they're saying late 2030s they could build a nuclear reactor if they really wanted to, but there's just not the market for it. The guy that headed the Royal Commission under Howard, we was talking about this before, Zukowski, he was saying the boat's missed. We should be going and investing in renewables. Nuclear energy is too expensive. Nobody wants to build it. Basically, the people that are pushing for it really are the ones that can extract uranium and sell it to another market. That's the main drive, that's the main push for nuclear power in this country. But when it comes to energy operators, when it comes to universities, when it comes to the distributors of energy, so your Transgrids, your Ausgrids, etc.,
yeah.
all of them are on board and say that no, we should be going with renewables. And it's not even the safety concerns. I'm concerned about the safety issues. They just give a fuck about making money. And it's just easier and cheaper to implement renewable energy.
Like renewables are good. Like yeah, we should be researching, but it's like the fact that we still have coal. We still have our coal-fired stations, power stations in Australia, and that we're not. And the things with renewables, from what I remember, right? Because I don't have all the numbers with me, but from what I remember, a wind farm or like a solar farm won't produce as much or as stable energy as coal-fired power stations at the moment, because coal, it's like you keep feeding it coal and it's going to get a constant output, whereas solar and wind, it always fluctuates with the weather, right? And yeah, this is where we need more investment into battery technology, right? But at the moment, we've got battery technology, like like what Tesla's done in South Australia, right? But still, the thing is, we need some sort of generator to provide a baseline.
Baseload energy.
Yeah, baseload energy, and I believe nuclear could be a more, I guess, more or less not environmentally evil version way to do that. As long as it's powered on, you're going to get the baseline energy. Like with coal, it's you're going to get carbon into the air.
Well, I was discussing this recently before. I'll just rehash this point though, because
right.
I think that it's very important when you're talking about baseload energy. The first point is that everybody always says that we need to have this constant, stable level of energy coming into the grid, and this is a 20th century concept, and most energy operators across the planet now will agree that what you actually need to do is cycle energy, as in wind is blowing in South Australia, turn on those turbines. Wind is now blowing in Tasmania, turn on those turbines and create a national grid, and that makes more stable energy. So the whole point is to have a stable energy grid. The point that I was making before is that in Victoria and New South Wales, they were going to go into blackout, and it's because their coal plants failed because it got too hot. And so they had to turn them off, and so they just went, shit, what do we do? And it was the Tesla battery in South Australia that saved it. The whole point is that you get a more stable grid if you have a bunch of different generators, not just a few, not just 5 or 6. The reason that they keep pushing this point, and the reason that both the nuclear industry and the coal industry keeps talking about baseload power, is because they want control of energy. The really exciting thing about renewable energy is, first off, as I was saying before, you can look this up, the most stable grids are Denmark followed by Germany, and it's because they have this huge component of renewable energy, which means that they have a bunch of different generators as opposed to just one, right? And so the reason that all of these companies are so against, the reason that coal and nuclear is so against it, and they just want to suck as much money as they can out of it, and a lot of these nuclear companies and a lot of these coal companies worldwide, they're moving into renewables because they see the writing on the wall. They see that it's cheaper, it's more efficient, well, not more efficient, but it's more effective because you can put it all of those things.
Yeah. Solid.
And so they're moving into it, and basically what they're trying to do is find a way to capitalize on the market so that they can control energy again. But what is exciting about renewable energy is that it is democratizing energy. It is giving you the opportunity to put a battery in your house and a solar panel on top of your house and barely ever needing the backup grid, the national grid. And that is what scares all of these energy companies. And that's why they're building all of these solar farms now, and they're trying to move into it. And that is another reason that they're convincing the coalition, look, we cannot compete with renewables. They are just being put online regardless. So they're now investing into it to try and get a clench hold on the market. This is what's happening economically around this question, right? So the idea of baseload is this idea that is constantly pushed by the coal lobby, constantly pushed by nuclear power, despite the fact that it is no longer relevant. And most energy operators will tell you this globally. The Australian one is saying it right now. They're saying that baseload power, because of how much renewable is in the mix in South Australia, which is over 50% now, they're saying that that is not going to be, that they're not going to have, like, baseload power will be a thing of the past in 5 years in South Australia as a result of this.
All right.
It's pretty exciting. I don't know why everyone's clinging on to this thing of like, you know, like, well, Chernobyl wasn't that bad. Let's just roll the dice again. You know, it was like, just go with wind and solar. What's wrong with that? It's exciting and cool enough. You like nuclear power? Have you seen that one in the sky? It's pretty fucking insane. Like, talk about fusion energy.
Yeah, well, we can't extract it that. Like,
We're extracting it now.
It's only 20% efficient.
Huh?
Solar panels are only around 20% efficient.
Hey. 30. But the thing is, look, it doesn't need to be.
The new ones are 30, but they degrade over time, and also they get dirt and stuff, which is why, like with rooftop solar,
But everything
I'm pretty
degrades
iffy on
over
it.
time.
Like, if you had a dedicated like solar farm instead of rooftop solar, it would be a lot more economical, and you'd have people who would actually maintain it, keep it clean. Whereas, you know, rooftop solar, people put it there and they're like, yeah, all right, you know, she'll be fine. And also rooftop solar, you get a lot of, like, you know, injuries from people falling down from the roof. Like, I heard it's pretty bad. I've got the actual figure, but it was pretty bad. So rooftop solar has like a health risk. But
yeah, but all
like,
energy production has a health risk. That's fine. And then there's always this point that the nuclear industry brings up, and if you'd like, I can unpack it for you. But they always say that there is less deaths per megawatt as a result of nuclear energy. There is so many things that is wrong with that. The first one that instantly springs to mind is there's only 440 generators worldwide. Coal, there's like 8,000 just in the US. So there's way more room for error. And they go, yeah, but it's about averages. But the point is, if you're building 8,000 plants, there's going to be more margin for error than if you're building 400, right? That's the first point. Yes, it's probably going to be less dangerous. You know what? No, I don't even know if it's going to be less dangerous than installing roofs. And yes, people do fall off that. But they'll do that when they're roofing. Like, that's the same argument as just saying that, you know, we shouldn't roof houses anymore because people fall off and die. They do fall off and die. It's a risky job, and I thank you for your service, Ricky. Tylers.
Yeah.
I know the lingo.
Tylers.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, a roof is needed, but solar is optional. Solar's optional.
That's true. It's optional, I guess.
It's optional,
roof's
you know.
optional to a point. You can put tarp up. Yeah. But anyway, the point is that, like,
tarp on.
But the thing is, yes, you can build these larger solar farms, which is exactly what these larger energy companies are doing because they see that it is more profitable to move into these areas.
Like, we should build, you know, large, like, things sort of work better in large scale, right? So, you know, combustion engines.
Well, no. But this is what I'm saying is no. Apparently, and this is not me talking now. This is energy operators. They're saying that small scale is more efficient because it's just about having more options. So, for instance, if it's a hot day and you have to turn off 6 coal plants, and you've only got 8 coal plants, and there's a blackout, right? But if you've got thousands of rooftops and you've got actually, they're even thinking about thousands of electric cars, and you've got a bunch of backup wind farms.
But they're all in, like, you know, like with rooftop at least, they're all in different, like, conditions, right? Some are more dirty, some are more clean. It's not guaranteed.
Yeah, but what we do have is, in Australia alone, enough wind and solar every year to power this country 500 times over.
Fair enough.
I don't think we're going to be expanding that much anytime soon.
Fair enough. Like, I'm part of the Science Party, right? I ran in the state and the federal election. One of our policies was 100% renewables. We've got plenty of sun, plenty of wind in Australia. We could do more with renewables, but my main point is that we shouldn't be branding nuclear as the most evil thing in existence, and we should at least be open to research.
Oh, I'm not branding it as the most evil thing in existence.
No, I'm just saying, like, in general, because like you're saying, oh, nuclear power sucks. It sort of follows the common narrative, like, look at Chernobyl, Fukushima.
But I do agree with those things.
There's accidents, and that's because Chernobyl, it was like
catastrophes.
Catastrophes, like bad incidents, whatever, negative, whatever. The point is, with nuclear power, you have Chernobyl's the first generation, and then you have like second, third generation, and so on. You have improving. Each sort of generation has improved like safety and efficiency improvements or upgrades, right? So reactors now.
But you don't think the same thing has happened with wind and solar?
Oh yes, the same thing would happen with wind and solar, but
and it's happening much faster as well.
I don't know how much faster, but
well, I can give you the examples. It's just I was saying this before, but I do like this statistic a lot. Is that in the last 8 years, from 2010 to 2018, the price of wind has gone down 66%. The price of solar has gone down 80%. That is because of technological advances, and that is because they are far more efficient than they used to be, and they're just kicking the pants off these other ones. And the whole point of just saying that, yeah, Chernobyl was generation 1 and Fukushima was generation 2, the way that Fukushima happened, it wouldn't matter if it was generation 3. It would have happened regardless.
Well, it was a really crappy design. It's like, oh, let's put the backup generator, like, where it's going to get hit by a tsunami, which happens like every decade or so. Like,
yeah, it was ridiculous.
I know a lot of engineers. I do design, but it's like anyone can see it not working. Like,
a little tidbit that's very interesting about that. Sorry, this is amazing. If you go up to the cliffside where they cut into it to build Fukushima Daiichi, there is a headstone there from, I can't remember how long ago, maybe 500 years ago, and it says on it, respect your ancestors, do not build past this point. And then they cut straight into the cliff right after that headstone and built Fukushima. It is amazing. It's so, dude, this is what I'm saying. Smart people make dumb decisions. Those engineers, those physicists, way smarter than I could ever hope to be. The politicians involved in it, much smarter than I am, but they all collectively decided to do that. And it's the same thing with Chernobyl, and it's the same thing with 3 Mile Island and all these other 57 accidents. They're all geniuses, but the problem is, when you're so hyper-focused on your little bubble, the problem is you don't look at the bigger picture,
human error. Like, this is basically human error, right? Which
is scary when you're conducting something that has 4 million horsepower in it, and if it melts down, is a problem for 100,000 years. And it's like constantly pushing out waste that you have to manage as a human. And you're dealing with all of these really scary, complicated machines and chemicals, and just hoping that there's not going to be another meltdown in the future, which actually the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists said that in a world with 440 reactors, there is a 70% chance of another Fukushima. Fukushima was devastating, and again, as the Prime Minister was saying at the time, it almost lost the sovereignty of Japan. If the wind was blowing the other way that day, they would have had to have evacuated Tokyo. It would have been the end of Japan as we know it. It would cease to be a sovereign nation. It's the same thing with Chernobyl. Now, everybody's just going to say that, Chernobyl can't happen again because of all of these things. They said the same thing about the Chernobyl reactor. They said there's not going to be a meltdown. They lied about how bad it was when it happened. The WHO and the UN is still lying about the effects of it now. Like, there's a lot of things that are going into the reason that they want to make it seem safer than what it is. But anyway, Gorbachev was saying, and a lot of it is basically to the fact that to build these, governments have to insure it, because no insurance company on earth is going to insure a nuclear power plant because they see it as that much of a risk. An insurance agency's job, their entire job, is to calculate risk. But the other point is that in Chernobyl, and they're not insuring it, so governments have to step in and say, if there's a meltdown, the people will pay for it. That's fair. But the other point is that Gorbachev at the time was saying the same thing, that he was saying the reason that the Soviet Union collapsed wasn't because of US pressure. He was saying it was because of Chernobyl. Now, in what interest is it of him to say that? It doesn't make it sound like... the Soviet Union collapsed regardless, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's more of a damning indictment that it happened as a result of their miscalculations and their accidents. And in a lot of ways, thanks God it did happen when it was the Soviet Union, because if it happened under a capitalist system, I can guarantee you couldn't get all the lead in Russia to just be pumped into it, you know, or like, you know, force 800,000 people to clean it up and be exposed to 1,000 times the level of radiation.
Yeah.
That wouldn't happen in a democracy. So it actually was kind of lucky that it happened as a result of the Soviet Union. But you have world leaders, both from a, you know, I hate these words, you know, communist and capitalist background, even though those words just, I think they're stupid, but both of them are saying that, you know, these things cost their nation greatly, and in one instance, stops their nation from existing, and in the other one, very nearly stopped it from existing. We could be talking right now as if Japan, could you imagine that? Japan just not existing anymore. It is an insane thought.
All right.
And this is the problem. Like, when a meltdown happens that is that catastrophic, it can end nations. Yeah. This is not my opinion. This is the opinion of world leaders that had to deal with the cleanup at the time. And the other thing that was happening as well is that all of these engineers and all of these experts and policymakers that were around them were lying about how much of an impact it was having at the time, and so they weren't making the right decisions. And it's because all of these people, because they're very intelligent people, you'll see the same thing with climate change. You would think that stupider people don't believe in climate change. That's not the case. If you tell a stupid person climate change isn't happening, they'll be like, okay. If you tell them that it is happening, they'll be like, okay. But if you tell a really smart person that climate change isn't happening, if they've read enough of information saying that climate change isn't happening, they're not going to change their mind. I mean, this is a perfect example.
It depends on the interest. It depends on the interest, really. Like, there's no... I don't think there's good and bad in the world. It's more about what your interests are. It's like, if your interest is this whole climate change narrative is going to impact my business, but I like my money, then you're going to say, oh, this climate change is fake news.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if your interest is, I want my kids to have a good future, or, you know, I don't, or since I'm a kid, well, not really, not like a big
don't
kid.
Sell yourself
I don't
like
know.
that. Yeah.
Anyways, it's like it depends on what your interests are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It depends on what your interests are, and so like at that point, you know, you might have engineers and scientists who might sort of try to downplay the impacts because of their own interests. You know, like if there's no more nuclear power, then what are they going to do for a living? Like, you know, that's probably like their living, right?
Well, this is the other thing that's very interesting. I was talking to a few physicists about this as a result, and they were saying that really, when it comes to physicists, the only ones that really agree with nuclear power are the ones that are in nuclear power, right? And you get a lot of the other ones, like the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, filled with physicists, filled with nuclear technicians, filled with policymakers. Go look at it. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. Is this still filming?
Yeah.
Sorry. Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is filled with it. The amount of negative things they have to say about the nuclear industry is baffling. You know, Union of Concerned Scientists, which I do like the fact that scientists are so even-headed that, like, the most negative emotion they can feel is concern.
Well, you know, it's like the climate change scientists. Like, oh, you know, they're like, you know, very, very risky, or like they sort of use like really, you know, like they use negative, but it's like not emotional. It doesn't seem emotional, but so like they're really good at that stuff. But I don't know, maybe need to get a bit more emotional sometimes. Sort of helps, you know. So you know, if they said, you know, if they said the planet's fucked, then, you know, maybe they'll get a bit more reaction from the media.
I think so as well. Look, a big thing that I think is wrong with the way that climate change is solved as a general principle is because the people that really know what they're talking about are scientists, and they're usually introverted nerds that collect Warhammer, so they don't know how to sell their message properly. That is a huge problem. But like when it comes to nuclear energy, look, a lot of them, when they have this idea that all these scientists, it's a unanimous consensus that they all think that nuclear technology is the way to go, when you actually go and look at it, it's not even close. They'll always just cite things like, you know, NASA said that we need 2,500 nukes. Nukes meaning nuclear power plants. That's just the shorthand that they use for it. They'll be saying that we need 2,500 nukes to, you know, combat climate change. When you look at what they're saying that 2,500 nukes will combat climate change by 20% by 2050, because you're talking about population growth and the fact that China and India are developing and all these things. And that's 2,500. We've got 440 now. If we built 1,000 which is what the US's lobby group wants. They want 1,000 nukes worldwide. That would cost $8.2 trillion, and it would negate climate change by 6.6%. If you got rid of all the nukes today and replaced them with gas, it would only increase carbon emissions in the atmosphere by 3.3%, which works out to be about an additional 1 part per million. It is not actually this great climate fighting thing that is sold in the media.
Well,
this is as a result of Vermont
course it
University.
isn't. Like,
right?
Of course it isn't. Like, you need a diverse mix, right?
I don't think you do. I think it
renewables.
needs to be 100% renewable.
Well, that'll be the best case, right? That'll be the best.
Well, here's,
okay, so
let me
here's
make you
the-
really happy
alright,
about it.
alright,
Let me make you very happy
alright.
about that. UNSW, USID, ANU, CSIRO all published papers saying that 100% renewable energy is possible. Transgrid thinks the same thing. Our own energy operator thinks that. There was this concerted effort with people from, universities from South Africa, Finland, Germany, all across the planet. They went through hundreds of peer-reviewed papers to see if it's possible to have a 100% energy grid, not just in a nation, worldwide. They came to the conclusion that it is absolutely possible, as did Stanford University. All of these academics worldwide are telling you this, and it's the same thing. Even when you read the World Nuclear Industry Status Report, they're saying that nuclear is on the decline globally, and this is just a fact. While renewable energy just keeps smashing its targets and exceeding expectations. The global energy operator...
we're still getting people building more coal-fired power plants, like...
But the amount is decreasing rapidly.
It is decreasing, but
rapidly.
we shouldn't be building any more. We should just say...
But you shouldn't be building nuclear either if you're trying to hide that, because like these things take like 15, 20 years. One of them in America took 40 years to go online and then closed down 2 days afterwards.
Okay, I don't know what happened there.
Neither do I. I was just like, what?
Like
you had half a century. How did you fuck this up?
Yeah, no, like... Well, okay, so look, so far we've been talking, I assume, the large-scale nuclear fission reactors, right? So what are your thoughts on fusion, and what about your thoughts on thorium reactors, and how about small-scale nuclear for remote locations and for mining like far out in the middle of nowhere, like because that small-scale nuclear actually seems to be the way to go. So yeah, sure, we've been arguing about large scale, and I know it's not perfect, but it seems probably small scales probably got a future.
Well, maybe. This is the whole thing. When it comes to small modular reactors, first off, they've been saying this since the 70s that they're just around the corner. They're still saying the same thing. The nuclear industry is filled with a bunch of fantastical bullshit ideas. Fast breeder, fusion, they've been saying the same thing about fusion. It's just around the corner. When it comes to small modular, I'll get to fusion in a second. When it comes to small modular reactors, China thinks that they're building one this year, maybe. There's prototypes in the works, but they're mostly on paper. So again, it's all theoretical. And on top of that, they're saying things like, to make them competitive, because the whole point of making these huge generators is because it's about scale. It's just nuclear power is so expensive to operate, right? It is the most expensive power there is. No nuclear power station in history has ever turned a profit. And the way that they try and get around that is by making them bigger and bigger to the point that they just can't physically make them any bigger because it makes it too unstable, right? They're saying that small is the future. We're going to have this rejuvenation in small technology. But to do that, first off, it's extremely dangerous. That they're underplaying the levels of dangers that's involved in this, because they're saying that to do this, you'd have to cut back on a bunch of the safety regulations to even make it even profitable. And that one of those example is that you would have one safety operation room controlling 12 small modular reactors. That seems like a recipe for disaster to me. And on top of that, they're reducing the amount of space, because there's supposed to be like a nuclear exclusion zone, right? When you build a nuclear power plant.
In general, yeah.
So they're reducing that size. Furthermore, it would have to be the Korean model, which is, as we were mentioning before, is just fraught with corruption. You can look into it into your own time. But there was so many bad, awful decisions, bootlegged equipment involved in it. Cutting back on safety regulation that would have been laughed at in the 70s, like it would have been there, like that kind of stuff. So essentially, but what you would need is one company building all the small modular reactors. As it currently stands, we've got dozens of different types of small modular reactors that are vying for funding as we speak. So that automatically makes it more expensive than making large-scale nuclear energy, right? It would all need to come from one company. Otherwise, the different mechanisms and all these kind of things, it starts playing in and it starts eating away at the profit. So it gets rid of that. When it comes to fusion technology, they're building that fusion plant in France, but that's not to build. That's not for energy consumption.
It's more for research because right now I know that from what I understand, fusion does give you like a net gain of energy, but it's more about how do you harness it? Because right now it's like, we got this fusion thing going. Oh, how are we going to get the power of it? Oh.
Exactly.
It's like
that's it.
Okay.
You've made a small sun. What now?
It's like well, we've trapped this sun in a cage. Okay, how do we drink the energy out of this cage? I don't know. We can't put a straw into it. Well, it's like. All right.
So that's the whole thing. Like that is just big research for that, but it's also consuming the same level of water as 1 million French people would. These things suck up huge. In fact, in France alone, they suck. Nuclear energy is responsible for 50% of the water usage, the fresh water usage in France. This is adding another 1 million people onto it, and it's filled with a bunch of. The other thing is when people say that fusion isn't going to have wastes and stuff. I have read different from. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. There is a guy from Princeton University that worked on fusion power for 25 years. He said it still has waste products, it just has different waste products. And they're still toxic and deadly. And it still has tritium emitting into the air, which is extremely toxic as well. But sorry, there's a lot of problems with all these Gen 4 things that it's a marketing tool, just being like, oh, flashy.
Well, it's not perfect. Like if there was a perfect thing, like I don't believe there's going to be a perfect, energy source in the world. Like, there's always going to be pros and cons. But as far as but from what I see, like currently, most people, the current law in Australia, if I remember correctly, is that nuclear power is illegal, right? Mm-hmm. And so, what it should be is that, we shouldn't have it illegal, but basically, if you can meet all these strict, safety guidelines, which we are not going to compromise on, sure, you can build it.
But do you think that would ever happen?
Probably not. Who knows? But the thing is, we need to be open to the possibility that, hey, maybe someone could actually come with a somehow proper way that doesn't compromise on safety. Like maybe, who knows? I don't know. Like you don't know. No one knows. And so. But the point is that, unless we say that, nuclear is not illegal, if you meet all these guidelines, then we'll never know.
Well, I don't know if that's true. I think that if they did have a viable option, there would be a lot of people knocking on the door saying legalise it, and I'm sure the Liberal Party would. The thing is that a lot of these, the main reason is because the report that was conducted, the Royal Commission report that was conducted by South Australia, that was pushed for by, I think the company's MCN, or that one could have been defunct now, but it is these companies that own uranium. They were the ones that were pushing for this Royal Commission report, and they obviously ignored a bunch of the safety problems that have revolved around nuclear safety and stuff. They basically came to the conclusion that it's just too expensive to build with current technology. That's where we're at now. So all of these futuristic ideas with current technology. But the thing is,
but we should be open to the possibility of future technologies, right? And by saying this is illegal, then you're sort of discouraging people from looking into cracking this problem, right?
But why don't they just focus on the winning horse, which is renewables?
Well, I don't know. Like you've got people who are really with like scientists and some people tend to get really obsessed with one thing,
yes,
right? So you might have someone who's like really obsessed with nuclear. Like you've got some kids who build small nuclear reactors in their own garden sheds.
I don't know about that, but
that was like in the news. Like
a 12-year-old. Really?
Yeah. Well, not today, but it was like a decade or two ago. Like some kid in America actually, collected like all this small radioactive stuff from I think it was smoke alarms or from the watch or from the the glowing watch part on the dials. But he basically collected enough, and sort of made like a little like a little like nuclear reactor. Like it's basically like a bunch of like radioactive rocks with some lead surrounding it. But
Oh, I do remember that.
yeah. So that's happened. Like I know there are like two separate like cases, but my point is that you have people who are really keen, who are really obsessed with like one thing, and and you'll have people who are obsessed with renewables, right? So there are people who are interested in it, and you know what? Just let them try to tackle the challenge. Like it doesn't hurt to do it, right?
But like, look. Wouldn't it be better though if we were encouraging renewables, which is most certainly what we're not doing now?
Well,
which is
why
the
not have
vast
both?
Majority of, yeah, I mean,
not
why not have
us?
both? Yeah. All right. We all knew where you were going. They have, but the thing is that like these renewable technology, priceless amounts of scientists, and they are priceless because these are the people that France has nabbed up, that Japan and China have nabbed up, that have got their PhDs from just across the road over there.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Ready to go.
A couple of my friends are working in America right now.
And that's what's happened, right? And they're all
Pretty
nabbing
much.
them. And the thing is, we trained them. And they are geniuses in the fields of renewables. And they are putting all of this technology that we invested in as the taxpayer, and they're just handing it out to your companies like Tesla and the EDF now, which is actually the nuclear power industry in France, but they're now investing a lot in renewables because they see the writing on the wall and they're just like, fuck, we better get in on this now. So that's where all their future development is going. And they're all nabbing up our scientists because we are not putting the money into renewable research here. And those would have been our breakthroughs.
Well,
and
we should be doing that. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't. We should be doing that.
So why can't just the people that are obsessed with nuclear just fuck off to Russia and America and give us back our renewables, guys? Because the other...
I don't know. I don't know, like, ask them. I don't know, like,
Okay,
I know
okay,
some...
I don't know why.
I know some people are
answer
into it. And some people are really into it, like... but what I'm saying, is, like, and basically, as long as nuclear should be open, like, here's a challenge. We'll do nuclear if you make it safe enough. And that should be it. Just don't say that it's illegal. Right, and okay, and so far I believe you're open to nuclear if it's safe, like if it ever gets safe enough.
And this is the whole point. I don't know if anyone can ever guarantee that. And I'm sorry to bring up historical examples.
As long as there's a guarantee, basically. As long as there's a guarantee.
Yeah. Okay. If they're in a far off, futuristic, distant world, maybe. But the point is that South Australia is 50% there, and all it took was a bit of subsidy. It took a Labor government being in office for a long period of time to oversee renewables being invested in, right? Yeah. That could have happened nationally. Yeah. But instead, the Minerals Council decided, no, coal's more profitable.
No,
kicked them out,
no, screw them.
So it's just, look, I think that all these future technologies, essentially, if the science is correct, we've only got 12 years to act on climate change. The only glimmer of hope, the only glimmer of optimism that I see in climate change, out of all the news that I read about this, and this is essentially my job to research what is happening in terms of government and stuff, right? The only glimmer of hope is renewables. It just keeps smashing its targets. For instance, the Energy Institute, which is basically the global energy operator, they were predicting that there would be 24% renewable energy by 2022. In a year, they had to upgrade that to 30%. It's the same thing with South Australia when they thought we'll get to 50% renewable by 2030. Now they're thinking 100%. Now they're thinking, oh, we can actually export renewable energy.
Yeah, well, that's one of the points like the science fighter was making. Like if we basically, build a shit ton of renewables, we can be like the power. We could literally be the powerhouse of the world. Like we could just be exporting hydrogen, right? Yeah. But no, we're not doing that.
And the whole point is because we don't have a government in power that is willing to put down, like the Labor Party was trying to put down, it's just putting like this policy framework that was saying, look, we want these targets, and we're open to attracting investment. As I was discussing before, I know of one instance of like $15 billion of foreign investment being turned away by the Liberal government. I'm sure there's countless other examples of it, right? And it's basically because they are under the thumb of the coal industry. And when you're facing all of these, why focus on this fancy, far-off idea of having this safe nuclear reactor when you've got 12 years, and even by the Royal Commission's own standards, they're saying that it won't be built until late 2030s, probably the 2040s. When you actually ask the economists that were involved in it, they were saying, look, 2035 is heroic, you know? It's going to be in the 2040s.
Look, because what I'm saying is that I definitely don't see that we can be building large scale fusion reactors in Australia anytime soon. That's not going to happen. We both know it's not going to happen, because even if they do decide, the amount of logistics and infrastructure we need to put out to set up a fusion reactor and a fusion type nuclear reactor is insane. And so that's why what I'm saying is that we should be open to exploring nuclear as a potential option in the future, but currently, as in when we're building more power stations, we should be building renewables. I agree with that. We should definitely be building a lot more renewables and putting a lot more money into that research. But that doesn't mean that we have to remain close to exploring nuclear power as an option in the future, because nuclear power, for all its faults, it produces an insane amount of power for a small area of land that it occupies.
Well, so does the sun. Sun produces an insane amount of power.
The sun's pretty massive, you know that.
Yeah.
Pretty massive. It's
it looks pretty small
huge.
up there.
It's pretty small, yeah. Get SpaceX to charter you like a one-way trip to the sun. You'll see how big it is pretty soon.
All right, game on. You haven't changed my mind. Honestly, thank you for sitting down, man. And look, I do appreciate. I just like talking about this subject, basically. So thank you for satiating that. Cheers, mate.
It's all good.
Thank you. You got that?